Welcome to our first of many budget hearings for the 2026 budget. Today, we're going to start at 9 o'clock, which is now, with an overview from administration on the proposed budget. Then at 9:30, we'll begin to dive into supportive housing, and at 10:30, we'll be looking at behavioral health and substance use disorder, or SUD, as it is on our agenda. For those of you, we don't typically take public comment at these meetings. It is for, we've started deliberations. We do that on Friday. We start deliberations. This is primarily for commissioners to ask questions about all the information that they've received and have been studying. If you do have public comment you would like to provide, we invite you to our meeting on Wednesday. We'll take public comment at our 5:30 business meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, commissioners. Also, just to reiterate, the County Commission takes public comment in writing at any time, and you can do that on our website, and we can pass it on to commissioners as we go. Commissioners, it's my pleasure and honor to present to you the 2026 operating budget for Douglas County. This budget took hundreds of hours of work on behalf of county staff and community partners to put together a balanced budget with a flat mill levy for commissioners to consider. In the next half hour, we're going to try to give you an overview of kind of like where we're at with fund structure and revenues. But we've got more time for questions on that later if you want. But just want to kick off with a conversation about revenues. And I'm going to turn it over to Brooke Sauer, who will walk us through the PowerPoint. And then at some point in time, I'll probably start chiming in. Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, commissioners. So like Sarah said, there's a lot of work that goes into preparing the budget. Staff begins this work in March, and we wrap up the work towards the end of June to present to you guys the proposed or recommended budget for the county. Diving in a little bit, our annual operating budget, we focus on the budgeted values, and they're related to expenditures for personnel, contractual, commodities, and capitals. Those are the general governmental expenditure categories that the county uses. After we work to prepare that budget in June, the county clerk, in coordination with the appraiser's office, certifies the values for the categories listed on this slide. We'll go into a little bit more detail. Each entry on this slide, it represents revenue allocated to the ad valorem line in your annual operating budget before you today. In 2025, real estate made up 91% of property assessment sources. State assessed followed at 8%, and personal property at 1%. The real estate total is the total value for all real estate that's appraised in the county. The largest increase over the prior year was observed in 2022. That year, we saw a 14% increase over the 2021 real estate values that were certified in 2021 for the 2022 budget. The 2026 value is 5.7% more than we observed in 2025 for that increase. The tax increments finance values are then subtracted from that real estate value for each tax increment finance district by design as a part of the tax increment finance tool. As a refresher, the tax increment finance district, it's a redevelopment tool used to support industrial, commercial, residential, or transportation-related projects. It works by capturing the increase in property value since the district was established. These funds are then used to repay bonds, reimburse developers for eligible project costs related to that improvement. We then capture personal property in the total. This includes things like vehicles, boats, trailers, and business equipment for those who own that property in Kansas. It's easier to think of personal property as tangible items that are not permanently affixed to lands or buildings, so they can move. The last value that makes up the county's total assessed value used for budget is the state assessed value. State assessed property, it refers to certain types of property that are valued directly by the Kansas Department of Revenue's Property Valuation Division rather than in-house by the county appraiser. It typically includes properties owned by utilities, railroads, and pipeline companies that operate across multiple counties in the state. Once the values are combined, we have a total assessed value for Douglas County. To top that off, for budget purposes, a delinquency rate is then considered. In the past, we've traditionally used a 2.5% delinquency rate. For the 2026 budget, we've adjusted that value to 2%. The total assessed value with the delinquency rate considered is used then to develop the county's annual operating budget. So again, in 2025, the county's value increased by 5.7% over the prior year. This increase is affected by multiple types of property classes that are on the county's tax roll. The property classes are defined by the state constitution, and they determine how types of real property are assessed for tax purposes, and the classification is based on the property's use. So in Douglas County, residential assessed value increased by 5.3%. This particular class of property makes up 76% of total value in the county. Commercial increased by 7.4%. That's roughly 22% of the counties that are valued, or of the properties that are valued in the county. Agriculture decreased by 2.1%. And then vacant lots increased by 1.9%, non-for-profit increased by 10.1%. But I want to note that that's almost next to, it's listed as 0% of the value in the county because it's less than 1%. So for the sales tax revenue received by the county, this slide, it represents the total of the 1% sales tax received in the general fund. It does not include the behavioral health sales tax fund revenue, which is also generated by a sales tax. Half of the budgeted funds are transferred to Fund 302, which is the local sales tax fund, to finance debt payments. This is also where we will service the debt for the newly issued bond for the improvements made to the structure across the yard there. 2024 total sales tax collections were a 0.64 increase over the prior year. The 2024 re-estimated budget was set at $9.5 million.
So we wanted to show you this slide so you'd have a sense of kind of what we were thinking about as we were working on revenue estimating. I remember that I think our 2024 budget was $9 million, and we increased it at re-estimate to the 9.5. Given that the collections really just came in tight on that, we kept it at this amount. That's how we also projected the for the behavioral health sales tax, but we're just showing this as an estimate to further illustrate how we did sales tax. And commissioners, we'll take questions as you get them, if you have them. Commissioner Dorsey?
I notice the sales tax revenue is flat, but in 2026, we're going to have the World Cup eventually. I notice you have expense related to that as a high priority. So it would seem to me that we should also have some revenue related to that also. Secondly, the University of Kansas is projecting about $328,000 of additional sales tax related to their opening of a conference center in 2026. And I don't see that reflected anywhere.
Thanks, Commissioner. Related to World Cup, I think until we know we are at base camp, I'm a little uncertain, planning on an increase that I'm not sure we're going to get. If we are a base camp, this time next year, we can change that estimate and increase the re-estimate based off of what we know. That would be my recommendation, that we hold flat to that. Specific related to the improvements at KU, I think I tend to be much more of a school of, wait and see how it goes before we begin to count the revenue before we start to get it. I think timing of that project, the STAR bonds has not formally been approved. I think it could be Q3, Q4, 2026 before that project comes online. I mean, so I wasn't clear on how to estimate a potential increase at this time. And related to the project, the World Cup is a one-time expense, and it's really related to training in preparation for the World Cup. So it's not, I think we're going to do that exercise regardless. And it's not, and I think it's just a good emergency management planning tool to have to plan for that kind of exercise. But generally with projects like this, we get paid in on the back end, not on the front end. And this is just, Brooks, these are slides you saw at the preview for the next two with the detail that is going to, Brooke will go into the detail. So this is a slide you saw on the preview related to just our fund structure.
Thank you, Sarah. So the county has 3 levied funds. We have the general fund, which boasts most of the county's operational costs throughout the year. In the general fund alone, 35% of general fund expenditures are directly related to salary for staff that serve the county residents. About 13% of the general fund operating is contractual, followed by transfers, community partners, intergovernmental, and then our fund balance carry forward. The county only operates at about 1% capital out of the general fund. I think that's really important to note because we do transfer funds out of this fund to support those capital projects. So pretty much there are no capital expenditures in this fund. The main revenue sources for the general fund are ad valorem, which I just went over in the previous few slides, and then sales tax revenues. The key uses for this fund are to provide county services, so the personnel percentage being quite high is not surprising. The Employee Benefits Fund supports employee benefits for up to 550 full-time equivalent employees that are employed at the county at any given time. And this fund is supported just by property tax alone. The third fund is the Road and Bridge Fund. This fund is supported through property tax and gas tax and is considered a special use fund. This particular fund can only be the funds utilized can be used for road maintenance purposes. So, Sarah, did you have any other? Okay. All right. So getting into our estimated mill levies for these funds, the proposed budget is a flat mill levy over the prior year. The values that are listed on this slide are the total budget for each of those levied funds, and it includes the values that we've included with that 2% delinquency to develop that 2026 recommended budget using that 2025 estimated mill levy. We do use 2025 values to craft our 2026 budget, so it can get a little bit confusing when you look at those years and those dates there.
Brooke, got a question.
Absolutely.
Did you apply that 2% delinquency fund to the public utility amount?
Yes, it's applied to every category that was listed with the total assessed value.
Has a public utility ever defaulted on payments?
I had,
We've had some payments under protest.
yes, yes.
So.
But they showed up in a later distribution. Typically, those values will come in on the first distribution in January, and then the second half payments that come in June. I have observed a few years where payments will come in during the distribution in November, which was kind of surprising, so it caught my attention. But like Sarah said, in certain circumstances, we may receive those revenues a little bit later if there's a payment under protest or some process that makes it to where they don't make the first half and second half payment on time.
On this one too, just to point out to commissioners, we did move a small amount of mill levy from the general fund to road and bridge. The overall total is flat, but we did adjust that.
Thank you. Commissioners, the funds that are enumerated on this slide here, they are funds that are operating funds, but or capital funds, but their revenue sources are not based solely on property tax or sales tax. It can be a combination of those sources. So the Behavioral Health Fund is widely operationalized by the use of sales tax and then transfers of property tax funds from the general fund. The services performed out of this fund are behavioral health and substance use disorder services. The county also has the local 1% sales tax fund. This is the fund that we use to service our debt. Motor vehicle operations, I would consider this to be somewhat of an enterprise fund. It's from vehicle registration fees, and we pay staff out of this fund. And typically for this one, we do a little dance every year where, you know, the fund balance will get kind of low and then we'll have to move staff out to the general fund. And then once the fund balance gets a little bit higher, then we have to do that again. So we're constantly trying to make sure that this fund stays stable and just rearranging and moving things around. The emergency telephone.
And Brooke,
Oh,
sorry.
yes.
With that, with the motor vehicle, the reason that fund gets a little awkward is because the state doesn't allow us to recoup the total cost of doing the state's business of collecting that, correct?
Correct. They limit the amount of fees we can charge on this fund, and so local taxpayers are subsidizing state services.
Absolutely. I think that that was a really great point to bring up. I know that we have worked in past to get information to legislation, trying to describe our challenges with respect to this fund and how we pay staff and perform services for the state using the fees generated in this fund. Moving along to the emergency telephone fund, these are 911 telephone fees. Everyone sees these on their cell phone bill, and that goes to support emergency dispatch services. Our bond and interest fund is a small fund that is primarily resourced by special assessments, and it serves to satisfy debt payments on special assessment projects. The Municipalities Fight Addiction Fund is a newer fund. The resources available for this one are made through the National Opioid Settlement. And it is a restricted use fund, and it mainly serves SUD services and then opioid mitigation programs. The Special Parks and Rec Fund is supported through liquor tax as well as the Special Alcohol Fund. By statute, the funding is supposed to be split 3 ways between this fund, or these 2 funds, and the general fund. They can maintain and improve parks and support additional substance use disorder programming.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So back on page 1 of our budget book on the estimated levies, on the local county sales tax, it's listed as 9 million, and the behavioral health sales tax is listed as 34 million. Can we go over why a 1/4 cent sales tax is generating 34 million versus a 1% sales tax is generating 9 million.
So on the 1 cent countywide sales tax, we don't keep the whole amount. We share it with the cities in Douglas County, and it's a formula that we could look up and get to you. It's set by statute. On the 1/4 cent sales tax, we keep the entire amount. The cities do not receive any of that.
Okay. Maybe in the future, we can list that as the percentage of that 1%. I think it just,
Yeah,
it
It's
throws,
confusing. Yeah.
for the public, I think it could be confusing because it looks like there's a math error there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Well, wait a minute. The 32 million is years of 1/4 cent sales tax, though, right? It's not 1 year.
Well, which page are you talking about? Page?
Looking at page 1.
Account 303 on the slide there.
Yeah. So, well, as we get to this next slide, we'll kind of get into that.
Okay.
So, Brooke, if you want to advance it, because you're right, the fund balance in that fund includes the reserves
Got it.
that have been, that accumulated before some of the expenses came into place. Yeah, I think we could try to find, but I still think Commissioner Kelly's got a valid point in terms of like how we talk about what is in Fund 302 versus what's in Fund 303 in terms of those percentages.
And to Commissioner Dorsey's point, it might be good to list what is our fund balance in those funds.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
that we're clear, because it seems like on that page, we're talking about revenue, and then we're also including fund balance in those numbers.
That's a total budget on
Yeah.
this, on this spreadsheet up here, and on your page 1, that's a total budget amount. And we do budget on Fund 303, we do budget to spend the entire reserve if needed, just so we have the authorization to do so, although it would violate your policy to spend it all. So that is also a little different than how we show the general fund as well.
Thanks
and I
for
was-
clarifying that, yeah.
And I was going to mention, staff's recommendation here, as we've tried to really do some work on cleaning up our fund structure and clarity about what our funds are for. At the conclusion of this budget process, I'd like to recommend to the commissioners that we move any excess fund balance on Fund 303 to the capital improvement plan. That would limit its use in the future. So it's something to consider, but it is strange and difficult from a statutory perspective to have both capital expenses and operating expenses in the same fund, and sometimes isn't clear to the public as to the purpose of that fund. But that's something we can just talk about as we go through.
And the opioid fund?
Yeah.
Where, I guess I'm not seeing that exactly and where that's actually lined out and how we have either historically spent those dollars.
We've not spent a lot of those funds. It's a relatively new fund for us. We can get you some projections on, I'm trying to think if do we have something in the summaries, Jake, on opioid fund? I don't know that we do. We can get it to you. It's going to be really front loaded. You have your balance in there. It's going to be front loaded. Some companies are paying their settlements out kind of all at once. Some of these are projections, but we can get commissioners more detail on the opioid fund. And so far, the only expense that we've ever spent out of it was a one-time expense for some naloxone with DECA. I do want to talk to commissioners more about how we use the opioid fund and the special alcohol fund as we go through this budget process. I think, it's time for us to take a little more nuanced approach to how we spend those dollars.
Okay. And then, so can you point out to me which page that is on, where I can see that balance?
It should be on that page 1.
Is it?
of
Okay,
the
where
re-
did
of
I-
Yeah, that towards the bottom there in that funds supported by other revenue. The 2026 recommended budget is the entire balance of 521.
Okay. So it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
All right.
and that one's different because we got so much cash up front. Special alcohol has been really steady that it's about, we budget 25,000 a year. We get in about 30. And it's been a couple years since we've made any payments out of that fund,
Okay, thank you.
maybe. All right, thank you.
Sarah,
Okay.
the opioid income, that's not expected to be stable and long-term. That's
No.
something that, and that also impacts how we spend it and how we budget it.
Correct. Yeah, it's, I think we get payments for the next 10 years, 18, but like many of them are front loaded. So we have some schedules that show us what we think we're going to get, but eventually that fund will go away. And it is very, while it is a pretty broad use about what you can spend it for, it does need to be related to substance use disorder. Move on. All right, unless you got
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, commissioners. I really appreciate the question because as I'm coming upon this slide right now, just looking at that local county sales tax value, considering that we made that $20 million transfer into the CIP to fund the capital improvement across the yard, that number was much higher last year. So as Sarah said, I'm not going to go through each one of the funds here, but these are our annual operating expenditures in the 2026 recommended budget. So some of the other revenues that the county realizes, one of them is investment income. The 2026 budget includes $5.7 million in the reestimated value. And then the 2024 actuals were 7.4 million. I want to remind the commissioners that this investment income is split amongst other funds that the county, where the county indicates that that fund realizes an interest revenue. So that total is shared. The current average rate is 4.18% for county investments. Our average rate in 2023 was 4.8%. In 2024, it was a little bit higher at 4.6%. And for our 2025 and 2026 revenue estimates, were locked in at those rates. So hopefully we can see a pretty steady income there for those investments moving forward.
question.
Do you have a cash flow forecast on how that was developed?
I do not have a cash flow. I have some information on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, we looked at totals from the previous year.
I've noticed that projections are in 2026, interest rates will probably go down a tad, maybe to 3.8 or 3.9. So there might be a slight decrease over current average rate.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't, that's why I didn't increase the 2026 estimate a lot higher. When you compare it to what we got for actuals last year, it's significantly lower. I am nervous about that. I'm nervous about, and I'm also nervous that this is a revenue source that's going to be not as sustainable for us long term. So I just think it's something we have to continue to watch and monitor.
So commissioners, I wanted to take a little bit of a dive into the fund balance for levied funds and what staff is estimating for the 2026 fund balance and then the 2027 estimated fund balance using the recommended budget before you today. The 2026 fund balance is estimated to be at roughly 23% for the general fund going into the new year. 29.1% going into the new year for road and bridge, and then 42.7% going into 2026 for the employee benefits fund. The staff had,
Can I ask? So we made changes to the employee benefit fund, so that's not expected to stay at 42. It is going to have some natural attrition.
Yeah, so it's why you see that the 2027 starting fund balance, we estimate it'll be down to 20.7. Commissioners removed 2 mills from this fund in 2025. to have a gradual spend down of the fund balance in this fund to our policy levels. I think you can see from what happened in 2025 to 2026 to 2027 that we're on target to do that.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important element to note here on this slide is that moving into the 2027, we are estimating those fund balances to come down to anywhere from 20 to 22.5% for those levied funds.
I also want to say while we're here, this has kind of been our practice. We try to peg, if we're looking at the 26 budget, I'm thinking about what I'm going to start 2027 with, try to peg that at 20%. At reestimate, we try to do a really tight job of estimating what revenues we're going to be getting in. So you can see that like it bumps up a little bit to that 22.8. To me, that's a reflective of, what more information do we have on revenues than we had this time last year. But I'm completely comfortable pegging that at 20% for starting that next year. I think that also is reflective of, we look at that with the delinquency rate. I think we had a higher delinquency rate when we had less fund balance. So it was just something that was part of those considerations are in my head and both, working together.
Brooke and Sarah, thanks for this chart. I don't think I've seen it quite like this before, so I appreciate that. Second of all, is this something that, we have a tendency to spend some fund balance during our deliberations. We'll be able to revisit this as we go to see what the impacts in 2027 of our decisions for the 2026 budget. Is that something we can do? Okay.
So outside of the county's levied funds, staff wanted to present before you commissioners today the 2026 estimated fund balances for those funds that, the revenue resources are not specifically from property tax. They're non-levied special purpose funds or non-levied capital funds. These are, with the non-levied capital funds, those are widely supported through transfers from the general fund. And then I just want to note that in capital improvement plan fund, with that asterisk there, does include the bond sale proceeds that will continue to be drawn down in 2026 as we complete those projects for the public safety building and for the courthouse.
And for commissioners that previously, and it includes $20 million in transfer, $25 million in transfers into that fund that previously were in the local county sales tax 1% fund. So that's why that fund is now pegged pretty closely to what our debt payment's going to be for 2026. And then here we're just showing the behavioral health sales tax estimated fund balance. As we said, there's a lot of operating that comes into this. So here you're just seeing what we anticipate the fund balance would be.
You've got it. Thank you. The annual operating budget also includes community partner funding. So $16.5 million is allocated in support to over 40 local agencies in Douglas County. Behavioral health and substance use disorder partners, $10.3 million has been allocated for those programs. In the general fund, at-risk and targeted populations, $2.4 million has been allocated for those programs. Health and Human Services at 1.8, Heritage and Land Management projects at 1.1, and then for our economic development partners, $736,000 allocation is included in that base budget.
Can I do this one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
I know we're getting close on time, so I want to keep moving, commissioners. Just wanted to give a high-level overview of supplemental requests that were included in my proposed budget. And they're kind of in these categories. Adjustments to pay plan to provide compensation for our county employees. We rated requests, as you see on your budget options sheet, staff rated requests. And included as a high rated request was a part-time IT specialist. So I was able to include it for funding. Some one-time projects for departments, diagnostic review of zoning and land use regulations, and then that emergency management exercise planning for the World Cup. And then a high priority for me for the 2026 budget was to include operations costs for the expanded courthouse and new public safety building. And so these expenses are related to the staffing going to be required for those projects. Just to note, the sheriff has asked for 4 deputies for courthouse security. We were able to fund 2 in this year's budget, but I do think we would need to bring on additional deputy support to manage courthouse security when the building becomes operational.
So Sarah, those first 2 lines, sorry, we can go back. The 2 FTE for custodial and 1.1 FTE for maintenance tech, those would be, half of a year's worth is
Yeah.
budgeted because it starts in July.
Correct. And then so you'd have a full year expense in 2027. We included, these are related for community partners. These are the only supplemental requests that were included in my proposed budget. Some small one-time requests from the Special Alcohol Fund, some one-time projects for the Behavioral Health Fund. I would say, commissioners, as we finish this up, we were trying really hard to get this done early. I think there's a few one-time projects we missed and are highly recommended in your budget that should get funded, and we just didn't, we were trying to get done. So, and I would prefer to be more consistent on my approach on some of that, so I just want to point that out. Also, related to conversations that we've had in the past with the Extension Council and our statutory relationship with Extension Councils, I did include parity market adjustments similar to state employees, and which is how we treat district court. However, I did find an error in what you have in the proposed budget. I think we built the proposed budget off of their base budget, not with the additional funding you gave them in 2025. So as you get into deliberations, we're going to get you a new number for that amount because we are slightly off on that. And we'll make sure you have that as you start deliberations. I think we're about 25, 13. I mean, it's not that much, but we'll get it adjusted for you. And then commissioners, this is our timeline for what we're going to do here over the next couple weeks and months. We've scheduled 4 days of hearings, and then we can start with deliberations on Friday or do more follow-up and cleanup or take it off, depending on how commissioners are feeling. And then we will come back a week from now at this time and begin deliberations. We do need to notify the county clerk of our intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate before the 20th. So that's something that generally we try to have a budget finalized by that point or ready for kind of, as I'd say, final draft, so staff can begin to prepare state budget forms and notify the clerk. And commissioners, we just stand for any questions or we can jump into hearings.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Sarah. Commissioners, do you have any further questions?
Okay, I think our first partner is supportive housing, and Jill's going to kick that off. If our supportive housing partners want to come up to the table, you're welcome to squeeze on in. I'd say particularly those that have requests, should come on up. Yeah. No.
Oh, thank you.
Commissioners, I'm Jill Joliker. I'm the Assistant County Administrator for Douglas County. And as part of Douglas County's role in supporting, well, we supported and we developed the strategic plan, A Place for Everyone to End Chronic Homelessness in Lawrence Douglas County. That's a collective impact effort between the city of Lawrence and pretty much all the people that are at this table and folks that are in the audience and more. Supportive housing, when we developed the supportive housing plank of that strategic plan, we came to somewhat of an agreement, an understanding between our partners at the city of Lawrence that supportive housing would be the county's lane, and that the city of Lawrence would primarily focus on affordable housing and emergency shelter and services. So I just frame that as, that is how we have this structured in A Place for Everyone. One of the handouts, the first handout that you have, and I have not the best version of a handout of our forecasts that I'll hand out in a minute and I'll have Jake put up later. But what you have in front of you gives you just a snapshot of what we've done historically as it relates to supportive housing. So you see, we start with ARPA. ARPA was the first time that we really acknowledged that supportive housing is where we want to invest. And that was in response to, from a timing perspective, the county commissioned the Corporation for Supportive Housing to do a supportive housing needs assessment for us. And the hope with that was that with that needs assessment, we would have some information along with the work that we did with our partners at the table to be able to know where we could make some significant investments with those one-time ARPA dollars as it relates to supportive housing. So you can see what we did. Important clarification on the ARPA dollars is they were one-time expenses for one-time things. So we were very thoughtful about how we spent those funds. We scrutinized who were the partners. Did they have a sustainability plan for the project? And was there consensus amongst the partners to support these projects? So I mentioned that, and a lot of those projects are actually coming. If they're haven't been completed yet, they're about to be completed. If you've been following projects like Clinton Place at the Housing Authority and Tenants to Homeowners. So then you shift over to one-time funding that was requested and ongoing funding that was requested, committed for the 2024 budget. So you can see one of the decisions that was made, I'll just point out for the 2024 one-time, you see that the Artists Helping the Homeless, that was a one-time expense through, I believe, the Behavioral Health Sales Tax Fund. That was a project that initially came through with the ARPA process, but it was decided that that was a good expense to fund with the behavioral health sales tax. And then you scoot over to see our funding commitment with Artists Helping the Homeless has been started in 2019. So you can see that ongoing amount move over into the following years. You don't see anything for Baldwin Retirement Apartment Complex, but I want to keep it on there because if we're grounding our work in ARPA, it's important to keep all those on there. From there, you can see that for Burt Nash, the one-time funding for the Rockledge project was 2024, and then that ongoing funding that you see there, that 645, those are projects, that's the county's funding for transitional housing. So that's the amount that's been in there. And then you see there's some modifications to the 2025 and we're back to the 645 with 2026. Cardinal Housing Network, we have Hannah here today, and you see that one-time request was included in this year's budget, and I think a lot of folks have been able to see that project. 2025. Yeah, no, 2025. And many of you were at the groundbreaking, or the grand opening groundbreaking that was right across the street recently for Cardinal House. And then you'll see the ongoing request that you'd see a one-time request that Hannah submitted for 2026. Habitat for Humanity, just like Baldwin Retirement, we haven't made any additional funding commitments to them, but we have that initial one with ARPA.
So I'm pretty sure I know what the funding's been spent for the ARPA. The Habitat for Humanity, did that get spent was it just the purchase of the land at the Castle on the Curve?
Yes, land and construction costs, but I think primarily land. Yeah, Rebecca, just land. Okay, thanks. And we can provide that ARPA request if you, okay. Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority, that big number is the ARPA for Clinton Place. And then you see the ongoing funding for the transitional housing voucher, the New Horizons voucher program, and the landlord incentive program carry through. And let's see, then Family Promise, you can see that they're a new partner coming to the table to provide the necessary supportive services. So not necessarily a capital project, it's a supportive services that go alongside the capital projects that are either online currently or coming online. Specifically, and you'll see this in your budget book, partnering with Cardinal Housing and Ninth Street Missionary Baptist Church, which down to Ninth Street Missionary Baptist Church, one-time funding in 2025 budget of $900,000. And those projects are anticipated to come online by the end of the year. And then you see tenants to homeowners. You can see a large funding investment through the ARPA dollars and the ongoing funding that was initially included in the 2024 budget that provides, underwrites the supportive services that are foundational to the success of tenants to homeowners. And then you also see just the administrative, that covers a lot of the administrative overhead that supports tenants to homeowners producing all the housing. And then you see their one-time requests and then their ongoing requests for 2025. So this is a snapshot of what we've done, what we're poised to do. If it's helpful to understand what does this mean in the grand context of our needs in that needs assessment, I got a big messy chart that I can show if it's helpful, and I have a small print handout that I'll hand out just for fun. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but that's the context that I want to give it to you in. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Jill, on the individual budgets for supportive housing, I didn't see any contributions from the city on any of those. Where is that half-cent housing sales tax going?
Those are for city projects.
Yeah, that the Affordable Housing AHAB Trust Funds pays for projects related to workforce housing and their projects.
I
Not-
think some of
We
the
don't get any
partners,
funds from that.
no, but I think partners at the table have received funds from the city of Lawrence for some of their projects that I'm sure they can speak to, or we could provide that as a follow-up.
So that half-cent sales tax doesn't go for a place for everyone projects?
Emergency services and sheltering services and homelessness response team. It's those expenses are primarily for the emergency services and shelter part of a place for everyone.
No, I meant the city sales tax.
Yes.
It goes for those projects. Does that make sense? Or maybe you should ask your question again. So
Well, I thought it was a affordable housing sales tax.
it is, and they have a committee and they approve the projects that go towards it.
Commissioner
Okay.
Dorsey, if I may, I don't know if this will help clarify, but I think that it has been predominantly for development of new housing projects, and they usually will have affordable tax credits from the state. And so it's not permanent supportive housing. I think sometimes the projects have maybe included elements of permanent housing or permanent supportive housing, but not traditionally. It's the development of new affordable housing with tax credits otherwise, or the restoration or upkeep of housing in order to keep people in their home and affordable. So there's some service related stuff to that. And then the new addition of that half-a-cent sales tax bump, I think it is also going to expand the availability for city to fund emergency services and other things related to sheltering. And so the permanent supportive housing is sort of its own lane of projects and funding that traditionally has been considered in the county's behavioral health sales tax fund because of that supportive service element. So I don't know if that helps elaborate further.
And Commissioner, are you wondering if there's opportunities for integrated funding and if that has been considered?
No, I just noticed
Okay.
there was nothing in there, and I was wondering if there was something missing.
And I guess my question would be, are there opportunities for integrated funding and if that has been considered?
I think what you'll hear from all these partners, especially we look at, I know you have a monster of a budget book, but when you look at the different funding sources that they've put together for their projects, I think you'll find an incredible blend of resources. And one thing I left off that first handout, but you will see it on the second handout, the big messy forecast, is the flexible housing pool that the commission approved for this year's budget. So the flexible housing pool, it's not a capital project, but it is the supportive, it's the rent and utilities and the supportive services of $600,000 total to hopefully serve up to 22 individuals. Once we have that program launched, there's a real intense search for willing landlords right now. Put a shout out for that. But we've got a great team together, and that's a partnership with the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority and Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center. Housing Authority administers the vouchers because we consider them locally funded vouchers. And then Burt Nash is our contracted partner to provide the supportive services that go alongside that. So that is on my forecast document that I put together as adding that into what we have available to us. And then that calculates to that net need of new units, 165. That number is pulling from the needs assessment, the needs assessment that the Corporation for Supportive Housing did produce that needs assessment, and the priority populations that were in that needs assessment. If you'll recall, a significant number of folks that were in that were folks that are in the IDD population. And at this time, that particular population is not called out as a priority population in a place for everyone. It doesn't mean it won't in the future. But what we know, and what I know a lot of the partners around the table, is that folks in the IDD population are in a lot of these categories of folks here. And the supportive services are integrated. Again, that doesn't mean that we can't focus on them in the future, but that was a big chunk of, so when it still seems like, wow, we got a ways to go, that's just comparing to that needs assessment that CSH did for us.
I can look down this list of the one-time funds and recognize these projects and the process that they've gone through. We've broken ground on many of them, and some of them are nearing completion. The Rockledge project, what is the status of that?
Hi, I'm Kirsten Watkins from Burt Nash. The status of that is we're evaluating many options for that property right now. I know the board has not met to discuss that and will not until the end of the month. And Matthew Falk, who is our specialist on that project, is out of town right now, so I can get any specific questions you have to him and get back to him.
I was going to also, as it relates to capital projects, we've walked you all through our service agreements that we have with partners several times. One of the new things that we have this year is for these capital projects is we have a whole separate capital projects agreement. It mirrors the City of Lawrence affordable housing projects so that the reporting integrals quarters. It's a quarterly reporting. It looks almost exactly like the City of Lawrence because we know so many of these projects are also getting City of Lawrence, and it makes it a little easier for our partners to report to us, report to the city, and it operates the exact same way that our service agreements operate. So we are asking that our partners send us a request for reimbursement, give us a copy of the expenses that they've incurred in that previous quarter, and then we will pay them out of that project account. And that's worked pretty well so far.
Okay, commissioners. So typically, Jill, is that the end of your presentation? Or
Yes.
do you have more? Okay.
Here for questions.
Yes. So typically what we do at this point is we have those partners who requested supplemental budget requests are here to visit with us. We can see which ones on our spreadsheet are included in the proposed budget. So maybe if we want to start with any questions around these supplemental requests, but you're also welcome to ask questions about just the overall budget request, if there's any questions around that as well. And maybe I'll just get us started if that's okay, commissioners. We have someone here from Family Promise. Hi, how are you? Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
If you could pass the microphones down to folks as they talk, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. You have to push the little button and the light will turn green.
So give me a second to find it on here. Oh, that's on the new ones. So Family Promise was recognized as a high category by staff. The request is for $50,000. When I look through your budget documents, I'm seeing that your fund balance is significantly higher than your operating annual costs. Help me understand why you would be asking the county for dollars when you have significant savings beyond your overall operating costs.
Our budget has increased quite a bit from last year because we built a new shelter for families. And so the cost of operating that is kind of a shot, not a shot, but something we can't anticipate what that might entail over the next year or two. And so we want to make sure that we have enough funds to cover any surprises that might come up with that, as well as needing to fund new staff for that. So I understand your question, and I can see why you would ask that, but it's just because this is a new endeavor for us, and we just want to make sure that we have the funds we need in place in order to support all the programs that we're operating.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate everything Family Promise has done and welcome you in as a partner with us. So you're telling me that $2.4 million is what you'll have in fund balance after operations, and you're worried about tapping into that $2.4 million for a $50,000 project?
That's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
This is something that we have thought about and wanted to just explore this opportunity with the county, because we are the only agency in the county who is serving families specifically in our shelter programs and in our housing and supportive housing programs. And we thought it would be a good opportunity to partner with the county in doing that, especially as the need increases and our partnerships increase as we expand this partnership with 9th Street Church and with Cardinal Housing especially. We've already been operating or partnering with Tenants to Homeowners and the Housing Authority. And so we just thought it would be a good time to partner with the county as we expand those services.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Other questions? I kicked it off with Family Promise. We can go in a different order if you like, commissioners. Anything else for Family Promise?
I suggest I kind of like staying with one agency once you start one off. So I don't have any particular questions for Family Promise, but do other commissioners?
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about, for the $50,000, what do you expect to achieve in the outcomes?
So that would essentially cover the salary for one case manager. And so we see from our case management services how essential they are. We've been doing this case management for over 16 years in this county, and we are part of a nationwide organization. And so we see from across the nation how important case management services are when you're working with families who have experienced homelessness, chronic homelessness, or chronic housing instability. And so these services will be like weekly case management meetings with the families, working specifically on their income, savings, budgeting, so that when they get into housing, that they have the budgeting skills they need to make sure that they're not going to lose housing again. But also we build community around that family so that when a crisis may occur, they know what resources they have that are available to them. So as you could see in our narrative that we wrote, families that in our prevention and stabilization programs, we have a high retention rate, families not losing housing at the time that they exit the program. And typically, our families across the board, 80% of families remain housed for 2 years at least. And so once they have that 2 years established, we feel like we're pretty confident that they can be able to maintain that. And so this amount would cover one case manager to work with approximately 20 families at a time to be able to help them establish the skills that they need to maintain their housing ongoing.
Thank you for that. And for the dollars that are spent, how will you be able to show the return on investment?
We track our families. We track how long they're in the program, how long, how many get housed when they exit the program or stay housed, and for up to 2 years, how long they stay housed. And so we can show those to you, and we utilize key performance indicators to make sure we're making the things happen that will help those families be successful and that we can track that ongoing.
Thank you. And when you say that you can show that to us, what does that mean?
We run reports all the time that demonstrate or that help us to know, like, are families getting housed when they exit the program? Are they staying housed? And if not, what adjustments do we need to make in order to make that happen? And often it comes down to our case management.
And is that visible to our public as well? Or would that be presented at a commission meeting? Is that available on a public-facing website?
We publish an impact report every year around March or April, and we often highlight that number as one of our outcomes for families, how long or what percentage of families remain housed at exit or, within a year or 2 years. So that would be available.
And for the impact report, that's really based on your overall operating budget, correct?
Yes, and that's overall operating budget, overall families served. And in our more detailed impact report, we break that down by programs usually too.
And for the 50,000, I'm trying to understand for the
Okay.
use of these dollars, how we can show the public the use of the 50,000.
That's a good question. We can determine how much it costs on average per family for the time that they're in our program. And I think that might help see that too, so this case manager would cover prevention and stabilization programs. And so we could break that down by program to see how many families they served. And then in those programs, how many exited housed.
Really appreciate the work you're doing and appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Appreciate your
much.
question.
I lied. I do have one quick question for Family Promise. I forgot. I did notice in the budget request detail that there is not any funding from City of Lawrence. I don't know that I've flagged that in previous years before, but it stood out to me this year. Can you just talk to me about whether or not there's been requests that haven't gone through, or is that a partnership that's been explored based on them really entering contributing more investments to homelessness and sheltering specifically? I'm curious about that partnership.
Yes, we have not requested funds, except that I think 5 or 6 years ago, we did request AHAB funds and received those. But since then, we have not done that. And it is something that we have considered exploring, but haven't made any movement towards at this point. That's all.
Yep,
I
thank
don't
you
know.
very much. I thought that might be the answer, and I thought if we hadn't talked about it before, it just probably meant there hadn't been. I was aware of the AHAB request, the sort of one-time grant basis, but I wasn't sure if there had been any exploration of partnering conversations and funding opportunities related to sheltering specifically, since that's a significant role that you play in the community.
We do, I will say, we do work collaboratively with the city and their partners also in the sheltering programs and working together to find housing and shelter for families.
Any other questions for Family Promise? Thank you for being here. All right. Anybody have another organization?
Yep.
They have questions for? Go for it, Commissioner Reed.
Hi, Hannah. Welcome. I have a couple questions about Cardinal Housing Network. One, I'm just curious, given the nature of at least a couple of the homes, I think both on Ohio, have you explored any historic resources, tax credits? Is that a part of the project that's just maybe not detailed or understood here in this report yet?
Yes, both houses qualified for both state and federal tax credits. And as of July 1st, 40% of the cost will be redistributed to um, the projects. So the current project at 1128 Ohio, I imagine the final budget will be around 275. It's required a significant amount of exterior rehabilitation that we weren't anticipating, a lot of cedar replacement. But we will get some of those funds back and they will be applied to utilizing our, I think it'll come out to around 88,000 after lawyer fees, and those will be applied to construction at 1126 Ohio.
Thank you. Let's see. So once all of the restoration and renovation work is done and they are ready to be resided in fully, what sort of funding opportunities do you anticipate pursuing related to ongoing operating costs for services, but then just the ongoing maintenance costs too?
Yes, so the funds that will be generated from the historical tax credits at 1126, which is the request that's been submitted for this next year, this 247, those funds will be pooled and will be used for ongoing maintenance. Again, that will be likely around the same amount, and will support any additional rehabilitation efforts that are needed. And then in terms of ongoing grant funding, I do at some hope plan to expand. We are still in such early phases that we were able to apply and receive funds from the Kansas Fight Addictions Fund, similar to the municipalities fights addiction. And we received 2 salaried positions it was March 1st through April of 2026. And so we will likely submit another request this upcoming year. They generally have about 6 to 10 million per RFP that they put out. So there's some good opportunities in that realm, but we'll likely seek, as we expand, some operational funds. A lot of the grant opportunities and foundation opportunities prefer the one-time grant asks. And so we will probably likely have to explore opportunities for operational. We don't technically qualify for any of the AHAB funds over at the city because we're transitional in nature. And so Douglas County is kind of our primary opportunity within the county.
Thank you, Hannah. I don't have any other questions.
I have a follow-up question. So one of the things in your statement was to talk about wanting to keep your rent below kind of even the average for around affordable housing. Is some of this supplemental request to help offset that, or what are your plans to kind of make that viable?
So we've actually, it's not requested in here. We did explore what it would look like to have about $15,000 to kind of support 1 or 2 months. But since we have developed pending funding, a partnership with Family Promise. They work very closely with the New Horizons voucher fund, the local subsidy. And so we will likely be seeing a lot of individuals that will be having access to those local vouchers. But we don't anticipate, the rents have been kept really low, mostly due to maintenance, but we won't be increasing those once these go live. So kind of a no net gain in terms of ownership.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Hannah. So we talked about Family Promise first, and from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like Cardinal does sort of the case management work. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's best practices too for supportive housing, is to have a separate entity provide the support services and then the housing be separate.
Great. And so what would be the impact on your supportive housing projects if you didn't have that case management from Family Promise?
It would be bad. We're just not qualified, and we don't have, as a new organization, have the resources. Also, Family Promise is very well recommended by just about every agency in town as one of the best at case management. So I feel very fortunate that we were able to put this in front of this body. But all of the units will be, there's 7 units available there, and they will all be for single moms with kids. So it's a CHIP priority and a priority for a place for everyone. But yes, we absolutely need those supportive services. Working in the SUD kind of field too, there's a bit of accountability that needs to take place, especially with children around. So.
And so since I picked on Family Promise's fund balance, do you know your percentage of fund balance?
It's pretty minimal.
It's 7%. So, which understandable as long as you all have been around. But I think it's for the public who's listening in on this discussion, it's really important why we bring everyone here together is because how we coordinate that care among those organizations, that some groups are really good at doing one thing and other groups really need to support that. I do think it makes it challenging as a commissioner sometimes because you're looking at different budget requests in isolation and you have to see the whole picture. So
Yes.
thanks.
Thank you.
Hannah, thank you. Appreciate the work that you're doing. When we think about reporting on the outcomes, how do you see reporting back to commissioners and or the community on the work that you're doing?
So as far as I know, and Jill, please correct me if I'm wrong, my peer agency, Artists Helping the Homeless, they serve the male population here in Douglas County, has a pretty strict monthly reporting structure. Is it quarterly? Monthly reporting structure. So I will be starting to submit those here in the next month. We had our grand opening May 28th. And so we are not quite ready to submit a report, but that will be ongoing. And then everything that we do in terms of the work over on the Ohio houses, we can coordinate with Family Promise to kind of talk about the program itself and all of 3 houses. It's a 2-year transitional, so it's very much in alignment with what Brenda and her team are tracking anyway. And so I think we'll be able to, at the end of the next few years, be able to really see the impact on what a weekly case management session looks like. Those are housed in home. And so I think we'll be able to really provide some substantial impact reports there. But I will be submitting the monthly reports to Jill and team.
I was just going to add that I think, so, and this is what I was thinking when you were asking questions of Family Promise, Commissioner Anderson, is as part of the service agreements that we have with our community partners, there's an expectation that they'll report outcomes on a quarterly basis. And so should Family Promise be included in the budget for next year, we would work with them to develop a set of outcomes that is a accurate reflection of the request. And so I think for Family Promise, it's gonna look really interesting because it's going to be a reflection of the supportive services that are occurring at Cardinal. They're happening at 9th Street Missionary Baptist. It could also be a reflection of, we know that Family Promise is, and like a lot of our providers, they're real creative. They're working with Rebecca. They're working with the Housing Authority. So it's almost an opportunity for us to have a new way of reporting our supportive housing investments because we truly have that, like to be able to paint that picture that Commissioner Kelly, you were, I think, asking about is how do we look at what's something that marries the one-time capital requests and the ongoing supportive services to illustrate that important separation of the supportive property management services and the supportive capital investments.
And am I also hearing then maybe a connection back to the community health improvement plan since it's also connected?
Correct.
Okay.
It meets 3 or 4 of the, we also accept MAT residents. And then a lot of the anti-poverty and behavioral health focuses on moms and kids, single female headed households. So I think there's 3 or 4 of the points that this project would address.
Thank
Hannah,
you.
will you, I'm sorry.
No, you're
Commissioner.
fine. Thank you.
Will you mention what MAT is? Will you?
Yes, medication-assisted treatment. It's become very popular in the SUD space and is changing lives and saving lives. So a lot of the organizations here in town don't allow folks with MAT. Maybe those preferences have changed. But our primary female body of housing opportunity is through Oxford, and I do not believe that they accept MAP patients at this given time.
Thank you for elaborating. I think it's.
Oh, and yes, and we will be, Mir was gifted, poor Mir, they had to wait a really long time for me to get online, but they will hopefully be providing some in-house intensive outpatient for our residents, but they also have expanded their MAP programs pretty significantly. We'll be utilizing their resources at Heartland Community Health as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really important context. And I also just wanted to compliment Hannah. I appreciated that throughout your request, you did specifically tie back to CHIP goals and things, and that's a lot we talk about. So I just appreciate your thoughtfulness and drawing that out as a plan that we look back at as commissioners a lot.
Another question. So probably in later 2025, but definitely in 2026, you'll also have rental income.
Yes.
So how will that figure into your budget? Because it's not recorded here.
So rental budget, current obligations for the LLC that owns the property, which is owned by me and my father. We have a commercial loan that has about $1,600 per month for payments. And then any other program dollars that are being utilized or any collected from the residents will be used for operational support. So if the house is full, we'll have there's 10 residents total, 9 residents will be generating math. Probably close to, 4,000 some odd a month. So that'll be helpful in moving forward.
So I know it's complicated. You've got a nonprofit, but you've also got the ownership that's possibly you and your dad. But how do we show kind of that full program support? So the rental money coming in, what's being covered by the loan?
And I think that I can absolutely provide that to commissioners. And I think we're getting a better idea too of how that will play out, given a lot of our process is strictly referral. So we're utilizing barrier reduction funds. And so it'll be kind of a trial and error to see how this plays out. But yes, that'll be a huge component of our operational funds.
When do you expect folks to move in? I know you've had a
So there's
opening on one.
Yeah, there's 5 currently, 5 out of the 10 over 1046, 1128. We've completed the exterior renovations, which were much more extensive than we had anticipated. But we will likely be open by September or October to house 3 families in 3 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartments.
Thank you.
Any more questions for the Cardinal Network? Okay. I have a question for Douglas County Housing Authority. Thank you for being here. The request was $4 because you have a number of large families coming in. But it's phrased not as a one-time request, it's as an ongoing request. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
It's a one-time request to help house those larger households.
Okay.
Because it is a transitional housing program, 24 months. And then those larger households would move on to a permanent voucher if successful.
Okay. And maybe that's not the way it was listed in our budget request, but that's okay because I'm going to make this statement. There's a lot of evidence that this program is working very, very well, and you have a long waiting list. Why are you not asking for more?
So the complication is
the
Housing Authority has a set number of regular vouchers. To have an extensive number of transitional vouchers would prevent us from offering off a regular wait list to households that do not move through the transitional housing program. So we're at a we have to maintain a balance of the number of transitional vouchers in order to continue to serve households that are not necessarily moving through these specific programs.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that, but okay.
Yes.
And then maybe then going back to my question about, is it one time? I think in the documentation you thought this would be 2 years that you would need this additional support. Is that correct?
So we typically ask for $100,000, and those are ongoing. The supplemental 25 allows us to serve those larger households for the 2 years. We just look at the wait list to see what's coming up, and
Okay.
after that, they're going to be smaller households. So next year, we probably depends on housing costs, and we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I'd say, Commissioner, yeah, we thought it was ongoing, so that's why we showed it as ongoing. So
And this is Commissioner Reed. I understand the question, and the way that the narrative read made it a little bit confusing at times, but I went back and reread it, and I mean, it does also note just rising rent costs as the primary additional expense, even if there weren't a large family or a couple of large families that we're looking at 24 months of. So I did read it as an ongoing request, recognizing that just rising rent costs and some current circumstances mean to maintain capacity, it's going to cost more. And that I didn't read it as a one-time request, but some of the narrative made that a little confusing. Does that feel accurate, Galal, that it wasn't entirely about the current makeup of families for the pending years?
That is correct. But we're just seeing higher housing costs, and might pull in Shannon to make sure it's not an ongoing cost.
I don't want us to get you in trouble with down the road. Yeah.
He's not in trouble. He does all the work. So we try to not ask for money that we don't know we're going to need. And so what we saw is, because we had to close the home list, if we could serve fewer families off of this list also, that our sort of net number of people that we could serve would go down. So we made this request to make sure next year we can serve the same number of New Horizon families. If it turns out next year that we come back and we're like, there's no way we can serve the 6 or 7 families, we'll be back. But we just try not to ask for money we don't know we're going to need, because we have all these partners who also need funds.
Thank you. Any other questions for Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority?
I'll follow up with one.
Okay.
So the budget document that we get, I believe this is strictly for the New Horizons program, or the New Horizons and Landlord Education Program, but it makes it hard for us to ask some of those same questions we've been asking other partners about, like, how does this fit into your overall budget? How are you sustaining that? And so I really don't like seeing something kind of in a vacuum like that. I've been happy with the program. I don't see an issue in particular, but that's just we ask our partners to go through quite a bit of work to provide these. So that just made something we flag in the future. And I think Shannon is walking up behind you.
So we are a little different because all of our funding is federal funding. So we have a lot of reserves, but we are not permitted to spend them on this program. They must be spent on the programs where we receive them from. I'm happy to provide you with our audit, but that's our situation. Is, yes, we have a very good reserve position, particularly for our public housing, which we have to take care of, but we could not spend those reserves on New Horizons.
I understand. Thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioners, we have 2 more partners. One, it's Bert Nash, who's here, and then Art is Helping the Homeless, I see, is also here. So if you have questions for them. And Tennis to Homeless, I'm sorry, sitting right in front of me. I don't have any questions for you, so.
I just had one question, probably for Sarah. Artists Helping the Homeless has a a slight little thing for electronic equipment. Do we have any kind of purchasing agreement that they could utilize to get what they need at a reasonable cost?
It's something we can take a look at, Commissioner. We haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay, I've got questions for tenants to homeowners. Hi, Rebecca. Good morning.
Good morning. Is that on?
There you go. Okay, I was curious, is the 100K, so for the one-time request to build 5 small homes in partnership with Peasley Tech and Dirtwork Studio, is 100K about the total, does that represent the total cost of building and placing it on site, or are there other funding sources that you anticipate going towards the production and placement of 5 homes?
Thanks. The good news is that I have the location that was purchased with ARPA funds. So you have already contributed to 615 North 3rd Street. We just got a site plan with new development code. We were kind of waiting to see if we could fit more on there. And we expect to be able to fit 12 small homes. Having gotten through the city process, we know that'll, we'll be a guinea pig with the new development code and kind of this cottage community, but we expect to definitely be able to do more than 5. So I was kind of picking, a number that we knew we could do. We already have that, and we also have state home money that is going to be leveraged, and that's another $350,000. And so we'll try to build as many homes as we can with those funds. But the nice thing is, that 100,000 is really, it's going to cost more than that per home, exactly. But the rest is leveraged from other sources. So every 100,000 I can get from the county, I can build another small unit. Like the ones you visited on Ward Street.
That's kind of what I wanted to clarify, because you made that statement almost verbatim that for every 100K less of the request, alluding to if we were to give a partial award would be 1 less home. So I just wanted to flesh out whether 100K is the true cost of the home, or if we were to award you the 500K, would that really sort of guarantee 5 homes, because you definitely have the other funds to leverage for it, it sounds like.
I can guarantee 5, that your funding will go to homes.
Thank you. And you talked a little bit more about the land ready, and that you've determined that there's possibility up to 12. So I think you kind of answered a question about some site planning there. And then beyond, you said it's a state home is the 350K that you've got secured, correct? Any other funding sources that you either anticipate or that you think might be viable? And then follow-up question to that, I assume Peasley's contribution is the skilled labor that is also educational for those folks, right? And then Dirtwork Studio, I'm a little less clear, other than maybe the design. Can you just talk me through, like, if there are any other contributions from Peasley and Dirtworks, and then any additional monetary opportunities that you're expecting to pursue for, to maximize that site you're talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, every site we have to be creative because of rising costs as we continue to talk about those. There's no question that you think you have all the funds and then you need some more leverage funds. So I try not to come back to you every time, but yes, we have, Peasley is exciting because they can get lumber donated in certain ways. Dirtwork Studio, same thing. They have architectural students for a semester give their blood, sweat, and tears to this project, and they call and request donations. So I think at 1140 Oregon, which is one of the great projects that ARPA funded that now has a permanent supportive service housing portfolio and has housed someone successfully for 8 or 9 months. That's a good example of where I think they brought in another 30,000 in donated materials. So we hope to leverage all of those creative aspects. But I think Peasley especially, every semester, they can crank one of those little houses out. And they want to just keep doing that. And the nice thing is we'll get better and better at it, I think the first one took way longer than I would like it to take. But we've adapted that process, and we think that we can keep becoming more efficient, which means lower cost.
Got it. Thank you. And then I just have one last question, and I'll let other commissioners talk. I'm curious, so now looking at your other supplemental request, which is related to a request for ongoing operating related to services and providing services. Hannah kind of teed it up for me well, even though that was not planned, I promise. But a question I have for you, Rebecca, is what is tenants to homeowners' perspective about best practices suggesting, or not suggesting, stating, because I happen to agree that it is best practice to have builders and or landlords as one business that is not also providing the services. Tenants to homeowners has blurred that, and you have a request supporting or wanting to enhance that. Can you talk me through whether or not you've had conversations about whether or not that's best practice, if it's working for you all?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know that any of us have done this long enough to know for sure. But what has happened is we have not had the support services we need to keep the hardest to house housed. We have added 30 units for the hardest to house, Sunrise House being a communal unit. And we expected folks there to need case management once a week, maybe 3 times a week check-in, maybe a med drop-off. The people that we are struggling to stay housed in this community need daily intervention. They need check-in consistently, and no one is providing that kind of service. So I would totally agree with best practices, but our institution and infrastructure right now, with great community partners, and there's no pointing fingers, we just don't have that capacity yet. The ACT team, there's no crisis management team that comes in the middle of the weekend. We end up doing it. So until we can build that, and we are trying to do trainings with the county, we're trying to build capacity, we're trying to look at what would we ideally need for this to work. But in the meantime, I believe best practice is having a care coordinator that does communication between case management. So they're not directly case managing, they're creating resources and discussions between the rental manager and the services that are needed to keep someone housed. If we have someone using the bathroom in their room, that is not sustainable. That needs to be communicated and coordinated with case managers onto what's going on. Is there a health issue? Do they need services? What is happening? But as a landlord, you can't just let people not use the bathroom. And I'm bringing up an obnoxious example, but that's what we're dealing with on a daily basis. And so if you want tenants to homeowners to provide the housing, we need to provide the services. And again, we are working with Jill and all these partners to keep upping our game with these services. But I think that absolutely needs staffing on my end to make those phone calls, to make those connections, to stop by and check in. Because every time we check in on somebody, and that's not, oh, are they breaking rules? That's, how is their mental health today? Did they receive their mental health medication? We had an example where someone was supposed to be given medication and the service just stopped coming. So a week later, they had a mental health crisis and traumatized the whole house. So who's checking on that? If we don't have the case managers from other teams to do that, we need to have someone that's checking in and then making that call to those services and saying, ooh, something was amiss, something didn't happen.
I have two follow-up questions. One, how many tenants right now would you say your staff is providing care coordination to?
We have added 30 supportive housing units, and we probably have 15 or 20 that have been housed with us for years, but they need a few additional supports, and we provide that. That's the ideal thing, is we get them to that stable point where we know a few times a year there's going to be a little extra care and check-ins, but they don't lose their housing every year at that moment. And so again, 30 plus maybe 15, so 45, and we're not able to do that right now fully successfully. Or what ends up happening is we can't serve the hardest to house, right? So we get somewhat, the need is so great, we can just house affordable housing folks that don't need all these services. So there's no lack of our services. But we're talking who do we want to house? And that's the hard question. And the hardest to house requires more supports.
Understood. And that is a well-known fact. You said one thing that I want to give you an opportunity to revisit. You said no one is providing that kind of service in the community. Do you stand by that? No one is providing supportive services
emergency. I said emergency, okay. Like mental health crisis on Saturday at 3 a.m.
Okay.
I don't know who to call.
Got it. Thank you.
I
just wanted to clarify and make sure I understood the statement in context.
But I wanted to say all of these people are working very hard on supportive services. I'm trying to say that we just need to up our game, and a lot of those really late night crisis management things but a lot of these folks are just starting to create those kind of housing types too. But those crisis management moments in off hours, we're struggling to find. And those are the moments that we need help to keep people housed.
Rebecca, I think, and the non-emergency services though, to get them to the level, like having a shared understanding of what do we mean when we say supportive housing case management services. We had a fresh conversation with Rebecca and her team, Bob Transky and I did just this last week, because the services are there, but are they at the level that we need them to be so that units aren't being damaged, that individuals aren't deteriorating, because that is happening. So they're not at the level they need to be. And making sure that we're continuing to have really frank conversations around what is expected of these services. I think it was almost a year ago, Rebecca called me and let me know, I have great news. After a couple months, she was able to, work through lots of conversations with the Burt Nash Supportive Housing team around a shared MOU around what is expected of what is the role of tenants to homeowners, what is the role of the Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center if tenants to homeowners units are going to be utilized for projects. And one of the most significant projects has been I can't say it's HUD funded right now because we haven't gotten our money from HUD, but you'll see a request from county administration later this week for ongoing funding for the HUD funded permanent supportive housing program. It's $321,000. We haven't gotten our funding yet, but that's 12 chronically homeless individuals that have primarily been housed in tenants to homeowners units, because they are the units that will lease to this population. They're the hardest to serve. They're our priority population and a place for everyone. So I want to mention those two things. We'll talk more about that this week, but continuing between Bob and I, facilitating and looking at those best practices, a lot of investment with Corporation for Supportive Housing and the ongoing training that we all compel our partners to do together. It continues to be really hard to have shared understanding around what is expected of our partners and how do we articulate that into our funding agreements.
There's another question back for Rebecca is tagging onto this. Do you ever call for the mobile response team through dispatch? Is that a service that could be helping for what you're needing on those off hours?
We use them whenever we can. They are not always available.
Yeah.
And again, that's no finger pointing. It's really, we're talking frankly about no one's not doing a good job. It's we need to build capacity in our services across the board. So this is really just in the best world and best practices that I think we all want to get to. What do we need to focus on building capacity for? And that is truly the services, because I can build 100 units and we will not be able to house the hardest to house without quality 24/7 services and all these wraparound supports, because a lot of times people don't want the supports. So we talk about assertive engagement, which means you don't let them out of it. You try to get that, they have to agree, but there's a level of how do we make sure this is available for them, truly there, before they lose their housing?
I was going to pivot back to talking about units. Did other folks want to did you want to follow up with that? So you mentioned with the 5 small houses built through Peasley, what's their capacity? Can they build 5 within 2026? Could they build more than that? What's the bottleneck?
I think they can do more than that. I've talked several times with Kevin, and they are ready to go. So I think they're also interested in looking at, even doing bigger units with their kind of modular builds. So there's some real great, I think building their capacity to do that makes a lot of sense too.
And through that project, have you applied for AHAB funds for those units?
No, because we have the state home funding, so we have other leveraged funds, but AHAB funds will certainly be applied for other projects.
Right, thank you.
It sounds like even after the houses are built, you're stating that even more capacity is still needed to serve the individuals, whether it be resources, MIH, Mobile Integrated Health. Have those conversations already been had, even though the houses are not built, the funding's not there, but have those conversations been had? Are you in conversation with those entities to ensure that capacity, right, is either currently being built or it will be built once funding is available and or those houses are available to serve these individuals and or MIH, right? Mobile Integrated Health, are they at the table so that the capacity can be built out?
Rebecca, I'll tee it up real quick, and this might be a nice opportunity. I don't want to put Dustin on the spot, but the homelessness response team, Dustin's the lead, and one of the things that the homelessness response team does is they make that initial connection. They work with the partners to get them housed, and then they also do aftercare. So their job isn't to do all the aftercare, but they stay connected with them. And part of HRT is there's 8 agencies, at least 8 agencies that are part of that. Mobile Integrated Health is one of those team members. So making sure that connection is available, but it's also that is happening in a lot of ways through the work of the homelessness response team and the partners. Sorry, Rebecca.
Thank you. And then from that data and reporting perspective, how do you see that working and or how does it work currently to report back either to the commission and or to the public, the use of the funds, the individuals you're serving, and the partners, how everybody's coming together to partner and impact the community that you're actually serving?
So we, started creating supportive service housing units that were leased up back in 23. So we have been reporting as Jill has increased or changed what we report, but quarterly we report on everyone we serve, house in some capacity. We report how long they've been housed. We report where services have worked or failed. We report who's left so that we can see what's the gap here. I think a couple quarters ago, we're so excited to have Hannah's project now. So a couple quarters ago, it was SUD. There weren't enough treatment services. We all know that. Again, a year or two ago, we didn't have Hannah's units, right? So again, not trying to point fingers, but as the landlord, all of it, you see it all, and it all dumps on you, and you have to take care of it. And so there is, I can certainly point to gap services. Now we're opening 2 new family units with Family Promise. They've been wonderful partners. So I want to give them a plug too, because they have a program and they do it. And they keep track of people and they work with them to build skills. What we see is often the hardest to house have lost skills. Trauma creates a lot of challenges. And building those skills back up to be sustainable is the challenge. It's a really, really hard work to, not just give somebody an affordable housing subsidy, but to help them know how to clean and cook for themselves again. Because if you don't, and you leave food all over, any landlord you're going to have bug infestations, and you're not going to be able to maintain your housing. So again, I'm giving you really big examples, but these are kind of the daily functioning skills that we're talking about with supportive service housing.
What opportunities do you see when it comes to reporting that you're currently not reporting on, that you wish that you could be reporting on, but you're not? Maybe the capacity is just not there just yet, but it will be in the future.
Yeah, I think that capacity growth and what gaps are needed for those wraparound support services. What don't we have in the community that we're seeing this family is really struggling with this, and there's not I know one that Bert Nash and we have talked about is hoarding. There's not any hoarding services or anything to go to. And that is a real challenge to keep some people housed. So that's a very behavioral health related. And so just an example for you of some of those things we could, next year come and say, we need to think about services to keep these folks housed.
Thank you.
Any other questions for tenants to homeowners? Dr. Watkins is going to be here as well for behavioral health. So if we need to, and I sort of have a transition question based on some of the conversation we had there. So if there's no other questions for this group and sort of keep an eye on our time, I think we'll move to our behavioral health partners. Is that okay, Commissioner?
Yep. I do have a question for
Sure.
Bert Nash.
Do you want to ask it? Is it specific about supportive housing, or is it for behavioral health?
It is for behavioral health, so we could move it to the brief. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Appreciate that,
Yeah.
Commissioner Anderson.
Mhm.
Thank you, partners. Appreciate it. I would love to take a little break, but let me check in with commissioners. Yeah, you think we're okay? Okay. Okay. Let's take a 5-minute recess. Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Shannon. Wait, we're missing one commissioner. Everybody take a big breath. Anybody have a good joke? Don't answer that, Bob. I'm teasing you. That's okay. All right. We're just a touch behind on our schedule, but we're not really too worried about it because these are great conversations. This is our behavioral health and substance use disorder discussion. Thank you, partners, for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob Tryansky to give us a bit of an overview before we jump into questions.
Good morning, Commissioners. Bob Tryansky, Director of Behavioral Health Projects. I'm going to give each of our partners a chance to just quickly introduce themselves so you know who they are and where they're from. We'll start with Dan Watkins.
Thanks. I'm the court-appointed interim director at Headquarters, Kansas, that operates the 988 crisis line for 102 counties, as well as the local crisis line, the 841-2345 number.
Good morning. I'm Nick Castorona. I'm the Director of Treatment Services for MIR.
Good morning. I'm Julie Brandstrom. I'm the CEO at Heartland Community Health Center.
Good morning, all. Lori Alvarado, CEO at DECA.
Hi, I'm Jason Hess. I'm the Executive Director at Heartland Regional Alcohol and Drug Assessment Center.
Hello, I'm Kirsten Watkins. I am the interim CEO for Burton Nash Community Mental Health Center.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Smith, Executive Director at Lawrence Douglas County Public Health.
So thanks, everyone. We have a couple of challenges. One challenge is that we have a lot of partners. That's a good thing and a challenging thing. The second thing is we have a number of budget requests where work overlaps, and so that's always a little bit of a challenge. What I'd like to do fairly quickly, unless commissioners have specific questions, Jake, if you could pull up the behavioral health priorities document, which is kind of a cheat sheet that we've used for this discussion over the last couple of years. And commissioners will remember this is something I kind of previewed and reviewed at the last meeting. So these priorities are broken into 4 areas: prevention initiatives, integration initiatives, access to care initiatives. And at the end of this document, what I try to do is to summarize supplemental requests that were linked to existing programs. So there are some other supplemental requests that are in here. This is not a comprehensive list of the supplemental requests, but I tried to elevate those requests that were large and kind of had significant impact on the overall mental health sales tax. So under prevention, things kind of stay the same in terms of ongoing funding to support these initiatives. Engage Douglas County's funding has been flat for the last couple of years. My Strength is a fixed cost of $28,500. I did want to address a question we got about My Strength, whether or not the investment was really serving the number of people to be a good return on the investment. 2 things I wanted to suggest to commissioners for consideration. As I said at that meeting, My Strength is a tool, and the marketing and implementation of the tool is something that really got interrupted during COVID. If you look at the number of users, subscribers on this tool right now, the cost comes out to about $14 a person. If we were to hit our target of enrolling 12,000 people over the next couple of years, that would be reduced to about $2.30 per person who was using the platform. And I think the value of the platform, if we're going to realize this aspiration and make it really helpful, is to keep in mind that a lot of people don't have the means or the interest or the initiative to seek robust mental health services. They may be in a situation with a family, got concerns about suicide with a family member. They may be trying to understand what is MAT or what treatments are available for PTSD. My Strength provides kind of a evidence-based, validated source of information for anybody in the community for free. So I would just put that out there and some of this budget also is for marketing that. So there's definitely, we have not achieved what we want to do with that tool, but there definitely is room for growth in that. And I think we should just keep that in mind as we think about this. Zero Suicide was funded with Headquarters for several years at a cost of $27,500. As we know, we've moved the Zero Suicide Coordinator position to Public Health, and there's a cost increase that's involved with that. Public Health has asked for an additional $15,500 this year to be able to continue to offset that, with the idea that in next year's budget request, we would be down to the original $27,500. Questions on, again, not specifics, but just sort of the overview of the prevention initiatives? Okay, let's, Jake, move down to the supportive housing. is that the next piece? Promoting integration. You have heard from headquarters. They have 3 supplemental requests that add up to about $860,000, I believe, or 875. 2 of those requests are for kind of retroactive financial support reimbursement for work that was done in 2024 and 2025, and then ongoing support in 2026. We do not have a service agreement or contractual relationship with headquarters at that time. The peer work, lived experience integration, that allocation has remained flat for the last 4 years. Mobile response team funding has remained flat for the last 2 years. Specialty court funding, there is a mistake here that I realized this morning, and I apologize for that. But the second line, maintain funding for drug court, that number should be $212,267. It's correct in everything else except for this sheet. I made a typo or added 2 things together, and I'm not sure how I arrived at that number. So one more time, it's $212,267 for specialty courts. Street medicine and mobile outreach, this was the APRN position that has braided funding shared between public health and between the city. And so that is what that position is, an ongoing piece of the funding braid for the APRN that is now on the mobile integrated health team. Jake, could you move down? Supportive housing initiatives, sustaining the initiatives that have been initiated over the last couple of years, including Artists Helping the Homeless, the Bert Nash Transitions Program, justice-involved transitional housing. That cost that $200,000 is in the overall request from Bert Nash for their ongoing funding. If you'll remember, we moved $200,000 this year, $154 from ACT to that initiative, so that's where that is. Continuing the flexible housing pool and support for Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority to do treatment and recovery housing maintenance and some ongoing costs or one-time costs for damage reserves. There are 3 supplemental requests that you've seen. One is a supplemental request from DECA to provide solar panels on their housing project. As Sarah said, that was built into the budget. The second supplemental request was to provide tenant-based rental assistance for the transitional units under construction at First Step Lakeview. So this would be for Douglas County residents who needed rental assistance as they were moving from First Step into the housing program at First Step or at Lakeview. And so that is that's the second supplemental request. And then there is a one-time supplemental request from Cardinal Housing Network for the rehabilitation of the Ohio Street project. The Treatment and Recovery Center request, there are a couple components to it. The first is Bert Nash has requested $600,000 for 2025 in anticipation of a funding gap that they expect TRC to experience in 2025. And then an additional $600,000 in 2026 and ongoing. So it will be an additional $1.2 million to support, to close the funding gap on the TRC. So ongoing, it would be $2.8 million to support TRC. I want to point out that one of the issues questions that came up during our review process with Bert Nash and with TRC was, what are some of the reasons for the increase in FTE? How do you project that there would be this type of a funding gap when last year there was a $220,000 surplus? Bert Nash has provided a document that I think is helpful to understand addressing some of the issues that TRC is discovering as they run the TRC with the level of acuity of the folks that are coming there, and if it's going to be a no reject facility, the staffing fluctuations that are required to be able to maintain the type of one-on-one supervision or two-on-one contact is significant. So if you have questions about that, I invite you to ask Bert Nash that question, but there is a support document attached to your budget materials. Let's go to improving access to care. continuing to support the intensive care coordination service with Heartland Radac. Heartland Radac has submitted a supplemental request to increase operational support. And you have some notes about that in your packet. The psychiatric infrastructure supplemental is flat, remains flat this year. The substance use treatment allocations, we're suggesting keeping that flat, the overall cost of that flat at $946,106. But what we may wind up doing is making additional adjustments and calibration into how those dollars are available and for what services. So at the moment, we have residential treatment dollars, we have detox dollars, we have medication-assisted treatment dollars. That all is in that allocation that we kind of shaped over the last couple of months, and we may need to do some additional tweaking and adjusting to that number. In addition, I think Mir has a supplemental request for additional treatment dollars, and my assumption would be if you wanted to grant that request, increase the number of dollars overall that we were supplementing SUD treatment, that would also be incorporated into those buckets, and so we would make those adjustments. Uninsured mental health services, Burt Nash's current allocation ongoing to offset the cost of the sliding scale was $1.3 million. They have submitted a supplemental request asking for an additional $500,000. The Working to Recognize Alternative Possibilities, the WRAP program, stays flat at $860,041. One more advance, Jake. And so here is a summary of the proposed new spending, or the largest new spending request is the way I would frame it. There's one-time capital support for solar panels that have been built in, one-time support from Mir Inc. to complete the work that they started this year, but in terms of the opening of Cardinal House, that's kind of offset the timeline and that's offset the need for expense for that. And then the supplemental requests linked to existing projects include the Cardinal Housing capital for the Ohio Street property. And all of these, I think I've summarized to this point. Heartland Radac also had a supplemental request to add supervision for the peer positions and an additional peer support position. We can probably accommodate an additional peer support position through the Peer Fellows program. It's not clear whether that's best based at Mir or Heartland Radac, or so I didn't elevate those two in that way. And with that, I think we're ready to sit for questions.
Okay, commissioners. Thank you, Bob. Anyone want to start off the questions with our partners?
I can start.
Thanks, Anderson.
Hi. So I'll go ahead and start because I was going to ask a question right before we went for recess. So we've had a change in leadership with Burt Nash. Really appreciate you coming to the table to lead us during this time. Knowing that the requests were submitted prior to you taking over the position, the requests have not been amended since they've been submitted to the commission. Would you talk through some of your thoughts about the fact that the requests have not been amended and they currently stand, being that they were submitted by prior leadership, and your thoughts around that, and why the commission should still consider the requests even though they have not been amended and they were submitted by prior leadership? And I want to also preface my question by saying that I absolutely believe in Burt Nash and the fact that it should be funded, but I want to understand why we should consider requests from prior leadership.
And maybe before Dr. Watkins comments, I wouldn't have allowed her to amend them at this point. Commissioners, I have to have the budget put together at a certain point. So, we had released to the public. So that was all done in advance of this change. So I do think there's going to need to be some flexibility with how we approach these requests moving forward, but I'll let Dr. Watkins speak to that.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that, and also appreciate the question. Of course, this is a challenging time for us. and one in which I am on week 2 in this interim position. So doing the best I can to jump in and figure out the things that were submitted before to the best of my ability, and ensure that the things that have been requested are consistent with our goals going forward. So I have reviewed all the documents. I have a whole team of our exec team here to support me today. We've had meetings in the last 2 weeks to ensure that the things that have been proposed are consistent, again, with our goals going forward and consistent with our understanding of the needs of those programs. I think, and I've had some meetings with the county already, I think in the position that we're in, my understanding of the requests, again, are accurate and appropriate. And I know that there will be ongoing conversations and understandings and potentially ongoing needs of things that become clear to me and to the executive leadership currently of what our needs will be going forward. So.
In review of those requests, is there anything in the requests that if you had written them yourself that you would have changed?
Great question. I don't believe so. I think the things that were highlighted are things that have been a part of our processes for a long time. I think the things that were reflected in our requests reflect things that we have known about in terms of some financial challenges when it comes to Medicaid changes, increases in uninsured populations. Those things have absolutely impacted our outpatient services, and with that, our sliding fee scale request. Also, TRC is something that we are evolving our understanding of how to run a crisis center that's unique in our community and surrounding communities. And so everything that was written there and the requests that have been submitted are things that are consistent with my understanding of the needs right now.
Knowing that the behavioral health tax was set up for an integrated system, what are your thoughts regarding the partners in the integrated system? So like I think of who's sitting next to you, Lawrence Douglas County Health Department, and the fact that they do have an agreement with Burt Nash. So what does that look like moving forward? And or Heartland? They have a very strong integrated system. So what does that partnership look like as you are evaluating your structure moving forward?
I think that's our priority. And now it's clear more than ever that we are all stronger together. And I think the partnership that we've already established with the health center is, I think, a really critical example of how we can continue to expand our services for our community when we're working together and coordinating with our other partners. So similar to the conversations this morning about supportive housing, I'm inspired by the ways that we can work together in a continuum of mental health care, behavioral health care, and each serve an aspect of the need in a way that's collaborative and supportive of each other.
And when we think about data and reporting, how do you see that moving forward?
We have a really excellent person back there, Tim Nolte, who is our data analyst. We have many options for reporting. Priority comes on multiple levels. One is the individual client level. I'm a clinician myself, so I usually am looking at those first in terms of our reporting on individual measures of success and recovery for individuals. We also have reporting options for our programs, and then obviously success rates, things like number of people that are housed, things like number of people who we're connecting with crisis services, or we're helping prior to engaging in our state hospital or other crisis services. There are many options and a need for us to continue to report those things.
And so how do you see, if funded, how do you see reporting back to the commission and or to the public the use of these funds?
I think that would be priority number one, to ensure that people know the things that we're doing, particularly now in a time of change in our organization. It's more important than ever for us to be communicative about those things. That's one of our goals, is to be more proactive about communicating with all of our community partners to make sure they know what we're doing, know how those funds are being used, and know what kind of services we're providing.
And so is that in like publication, website, presentation, verbally?
All the above. I would say we are producing monthly CEO reports that are public. We are producing quarterly reports. We're required to report to all of our funding sources. And those are all things that we will include on our website and our public.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to make a point that
my comment earlier in reference to reviewing the budget request. I don't think it's out of the ordinary because we often have budget requests that actually come before us. I have realized in the last 6 months that we often have budget requests come before us. So I do anticipate over the next 6 months, even outside of budget, that we will have budget requests come before us. So
No, generally no. So I try to move all things into this process because once we establish a budget, I'm locked in. So I do think it's one of those things that commissioners are going to need to look at as they approach this budget is that how do we proceed? But once I adopt a budget, I'm locked in.
Okay,
But
because
we
we have
do
approved other
redirect,
things.
we do redirect funds. So we may have
Redirect
funds
things.
from one end to the other, but the overall budget is set.
And yeah, and I generally don't have, an open call all year round for people to come ask us for funding.
Okay, because we have approved other supplemental requests, it appears, no?
No, those were all things that were already in the budget from the previous year. So we either moved it around or you put it in the budget and then we did and then we went to bid and we made the award. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, also, I would just remind on the issue of reporting and data and how we share it. I think we are at a point, and the point that we're at is for the last 3 to 4 years, particularly since a number of the crisis system components have come online, we have much more detailed reporting that comes to the county than we have before. We still do not have, at the county level, sort of public dashboards for each of these projects. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is the level of detail, and Bert Nash is a good example of this, that they are now submitting to us is considerable. So I think we've talked about this before, continuing to collaborate with our partners to say, what are the most vital pieces of information to elevate into a dashboard or a website or what have you is going to be an ongoing conversation. What's nice is we are now at a point where all of our partners have submitted for a year or two fairly in the weeds data. And so we're really now at a point where we can have those conversations, and we haven't been there yet. So I really think we're entering that season for the remainder of 25 and then how we report things out in 2026. But there are a lot of issues to that. There are IT issues. There are sort of making it easier for our clients or for our partners to be able to submit those data points in a shared and aligned way. And there's some work that needs to be done on the county's part to build that infrastructure. So, for example, the funding buckets for SUD treatment, we have 1 quarter, right? 3 months of data. We'll get a second quarter of data. Now we're going to sit down and put those spreadsheets up and say, how do we make sure everybody's has the same lines and the reporting requirements in how they're feeding information to the county?
And thank you for answering my questions.
A few questions for Bert Nash. So first of all, I want to back up to our supportive housing conversation because we heard from one of our partners that the type of supports that we need for supportive housing are not in place. You have a facility that you run, Transitions, that is another supportive housing space. And I'm just interested to hear, after 2 weeks on the job, sort of your reaction to those comments and what you see as Bert Nash's role in supportive housing going forward.
I appreciate that question. Yes, it was illuminating to hear the things from our community partners this morning. And I thought really underscored the importance of transitions in that continuum of care for the unhoused. There are people that struggle to be able to be housed in the community with the severity of their psychiatric needs or their substance use needs. And that is the exact population that we serve in transitions. Over 80% of the folks in transitions are considered at the highest level of acuity. So those are people with really complex comorbid psychiatric needs, substance use needs, chronic homelessness. And the purpose of that program in that continuum of care for the unhoused is to be able to help those people learn those basic skills that our colleagues were referencing this morning to be able to be successfully housed in the community. And that program, since its opening, has successfully housed 55 people in the community and continues to be able to help people move from a place of not being able to function in the community without the high level of supports to being able to do that on their own.
So what do you think is Bert Nash's role, to state my question
Yeah.
again, going forward, when you're hearing that from our supportive housing, and when we look at the total budget that's here for Bert Nash, some of those things like mobile response team, like the ACT team that we tried to stand up and struggled to do that. Some of those supports that are in there, what I was hearing today, are not being provided by anyone. I don't necessarily agree with that statement, but my question is, what role does Bert Nash have to play in making sure those services are there?
I think it's a critical role, one in which we're continuing to evolve and improve and make sure that we're doing everything possible to sustain. All of these programs, I think, are ones in which are fairly new. You're talking about ACT, MRT. These are ones that we are, as we're learning more about them and how to serve our community, we've had to pivot some aspects of those programs. I think also what I heard this morning is the significance of the need within our community. And so that reflects to me in some ways that our programs like MRT, how great they are still not sufficient to meet the needs broadly for our community for those crisis needs at all hours of the day and night. And so again, I think it's our opportunity to continue to evolve those programs, to continue to hear feedback from our community partners on what needs to be better and what we can expand, and continue to utilize our community to help us make sure that we're working together and communicating effectively about those needs.
Okay. And I'm thinking as I heard that conversation, how does Bert Nash, instead of wanting to stand alone and do all the work themselves, become part of an integrated system? And I think that's, as we move forward, that's what I'm really looking forward to, is how do we connect that? Because maybe it's not that Bert Nash is the landlord, but is that case coordination that we're looking for in that space. And what I'm hearing is that maybe that hasn't been as solid as it could have been, hasn't met the aspirations that we had. So to Commissioner Anderson's question, if you're hearing that MRT isn't what we need it to be, but we're not getting a request to increase MRT services, you've been on the job 2 weeks. Like I've been on the job for a number of years. So I'm just sort of sharing my experience there and maybe where we can go forward. Speaking of that, so one of your requests is for a sliding scale adjustment.
Yes.
My experience as a commissioner was that the sliding scale was changed without any input from the county commission at all. And in another example, RAP, the school district stopped funding it, right? There was no discussion with other partners whether that was the right thing to do. It's provided in those buildings. What do you see going forward as the role that the commission can play, being such a major funder of Bert Nash? What role do you think will play in those decisions?
very important partners. I think we have to move forward in a space in which we are communicating openly about those things. We're notifying you of plans for changing in those particular areas like the sliding fee scale, and coordinating appropriately to ensure that we are holding up our end of the deal when it comes to the funding that we're receiving, and making sure that we're, again, being as good of partners as possible in terms of our work together.
So if the thank you for that. So if the budget request is for a sliding scale increase, and we haven't been involved in that discussion to date, how might we rectify, like, what is the conversation? Is there space to have a conversation of, is that the right number for a sliding scale increase or not?
My understanding of that request is a reflection of the increased number of uninsured people that are utilizing our sliding fee scale. So in the last 2 years, the number of uninsured folks accessing our services has increased by 5%. We also are seeing increases in the number of people with private insurance that are underinsured, and so are wanting to access our sliding fee scale as well. And that is hard to sustain. The costs of outpatient services is higher than the funding that we're receiving otherwise, with Medicaid and Medicare going down, and like I mentioned, uninsured and private insurance going up. So my understanding of that request, that proposal, was to fill the gap as it is, to help us continue to utilize a sliding fee scale to ensure that all of our community members have access to critical mental health services without having to worry about the financial burden associated with that they could access our sliding fee scale.
And so is that request, the gap there, are you requesting it all to be filled by Douglas County? Or is there other resources that are filling that gap as well?
For the sliding fee scale, I can't speak to that specifically right now.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Dorsey.
Just kind of a follow-up. I have a concern about your accounts receivable. You've got about $10 to $12 million out in receivables, which is roughly a fourth of your annual budget. And I know you just came on board, but I think you need to spend some time looking at that.
I appreciate that question. I share your concern. That was priority number one, first day. We have contracted with an external accounting firm to help review our processes, and have already started that process to ensure our accounts receivable and our financial team have the support and guidance that they need.
Good morning, Dr.
Hi,
Watkins.
good morning.
Okay, to piggyback a little bit off of Commissioner Kelly's question about the sliding scale fee, so I understand that the request right now is to fill the gap and be able to maintain capacity as you're able to project those outpatient services and the gap that's going to persist. Has there been, and again, the caveat that you are new in this position, but are you aware of any discussions yet related to changing operations around scope of services related to outpatient services? And part of that question is, what does the structure of the sliding scale fee schedule look like? How is that determined, and what does the eligibility and all of that? But to me, part of that equation is also, what is the scope of services that Burt Nash is focused on? And is there any room for a change in that versus just filling the gap as the need currently tells you this gap exists, but part of that equation is the services that Burt Nash has decided to provide and maintain as an availability to all people, regardless of insurance?
I think that's a great question, and is right on the pulse of the things that we are discussing right now, of really thinking about who we are and what our priorities for services are. I think part of the challenge is that our outpatient services, particularly adult individual therapy and psychiatric services, are our highest requested services. Those are the things that our community members really want. And the demand for that is increasing and continues to increase at a steady pace, has not leveled off. And so we're really at a place of evaluating our programs, evaluating the options that are offered to folks, and weighing that with the realistic costs of those services, staffing costs, the changes in our payer sources, all of those things, I think, are things that not just us, but all community mental health centers across the country are dealing with those kind of, I think, honestly, like theoretical conflicts of how do we continue to provide these essential services and be accessible to as many people as possible and still make it work financially.
Yeah. Thank you. I really do appreciate that answer and that articulation. And it is not anything that is unique to Burnt Nash. It is something that behavioral health, community mental health centers are grappling with across the nation. And given the direction of our healthcare system and other things that feel imminent, is that having to reassess scope and the how much public funding is expected to, local public funding is expected to subsidize failures and shortfalls in a private payer system that's coming short. And so I appreciate the articulation. It's part of the issue at hand. I am curious, there was some mention about current renegotiating with those private payers and determining whether or not you're going to be able to continue to accept those payers. Can you talk a little bit about timeline? Like, when do you think you're at a decision point with whether or not you continue, you'll know if you have renegotiated rates and you're going to continue accepting that payer or not?
Yeah, it's a complex process, one in which we have different contracts at different times. So I have prioritized those that have contracts that are coming due very soon, and have already had some negotiation discussions with those payers. I would say that one of the payers, we will be making a decision within the next couple weeks, and then I'll keep moving down the list of having conversations to negotiate with the other private payers. It is a challenging process, I'll say that, and one in which I'm not sure how much leverage we will have, but I think it's worth the fight and worth making an effort to see if we can ensure that our private payers are paying a cost that is equivalent to the cost of service.
Thank you.
At least.
There's been some acknowledgement of failure in billing management system and that contributing to the gap in funding that you have. Do you, and I don't expect you to have numbers off the top of your head, but do you have a handle on how much that mismanagement of billing over the period of time that it was happening? Do you have an understanding of how much impact that was, and therefore how much some of the changes that Burnt Nash, that the request has talked about putting in place to manage that better and to do things like, do you have a sense, even a ballpark or something that you could provide to commissioners to follow up about how much can be contributed to that billing mismanagement, not just the loss of Medicaid payer, Medicaid funded patients or the private biller, but the mismanagement? Do you have a handle of that yet?
I don't have an exact number to share with you, but I can assure you that that is something that is a priority, that we are having meetings every day trying to assess. There are complicating factors to that. There was a challenge with our electronic health record and getting those payments out. There are some challenges, I think, with the process of billing and receiving. But those are all things, again, that are priorities in that first week of mine that we're having conversations about. And again, utilizing appropriate external supports to help us with.
I appreciate that. And I would hope that that piece of the conversation preceded you, but if it didn't, thank you for digging in on it.
Yeah.
And I just think, for me anyway, it is a part of the fuller picture that is going to make deliberations and thoughts about the supplemental request from Burnt Nash more difficult in my mind, because I think that I don't have a full picture of how much the sort of natural trends of loss of Medicaid for folks, plus the gap of private payer, like, I don't have a good sense of how much those are impacting the gap that Bert Nash is facing versus that episodic, conglomeration of issues, right? And so to get a better grasp on that in the coming months would be helpful for me. And I know that's not coming, I say coming months and we are in a tight budget process, but I'll just share that that's a part of the equation for me that makes it difficult to sort of suss out how, where the impact is fully coming from. And then my last question for you is, you have a equity focus areas listed, and in number 4, I just wanted to zero in on, it articulates that there will be informed and involved decision-making process and autonomy for team members. I just wanted to give an opportunity to elaborate a little bit on that and what that looks like from your perspective about how to really engage the larger Bert Nash organization in these changes and really have transparency and a two-way street about communication.
That's a great question. I mean, again, I think we are in a place of having the opportunity to make some changes in terms of our communication with staff, our engagement with staff, our ability to include them in making decisions and having open dialogue. And that's one of the things, I have been at Bert Nash for 4 years and have served in multiple roles there as a staff member. And so have the opportunity to build upon those relationships with our staff members on each of our levels of our organization to ensure that we have opportunities for all of those folks to contribute to the changes ahead. And I actually think that that's the most critical piece of our current state, is to make sure that we are coming together rather than pulling apart, and that all of those voices have space within our agency and are a participant in our changes moving forward.
Thank you. I recognize we have a lot of other partners who are waiting very patiently, but I did have one other, just a follow-up, and this is about kind of how we communicate as partners. So the TRC in particular, which is very near and dear to County Commission's interest, and it was $200,000 to the good at the end of 2024. The 2025 budget cycle, we funded what was asked of us from Bert Nash. I did go back to my previous budget book with the quote, expenditures should remain consistent. And yet there were, sometime in that process, 22 positions added, and then a different budget produced, and then a budget shortfall, a significant budget shortfall given to that program. So how moving forward do we communicate staff changes? We don't make staff changes outside of our budget cycle. And I couldn't tell you how many years we'd have to go back to look at finding 22 positions that had been added. So it's a huge, huge change that wasn't communicated, I don't believe, with us, but certainly not with the public, that was a big change. I recognize that it's an incredibly difficult model, and I'm in no position to say how many positions there ought to be to make that work. It's really more about how do we communicate, because some of the financial position that the TRC has ended up in was way outside of our process and our knowledge. How can we be better partners?
Again, a great question. I think my understanding of those changes in staffing numbers are a reflection of our evolving understanding of how to run a crisis center, and the staffing numbers, the staffing ratios that are needed in order to ensure safety for both our staff and our clients. And I think, again, it's an evolving discussion and probably requires more frequent discussion and communication about things that we are anticipating might be needed in order to, again, maintain the highest quality services and safety for our staff and clients.
I'll just say that as I'm evaluating supplemental requests, I'm having a hard time finding financial reports that I can really lean into and rely on from Bert Nash, and that is not on you. This wasn't in your position, but that's going to make it really difficult. I do recognize that you have some needs with the financial, the bringing in, I think it's SS&C to look at some financial management.
Yes.
So I can acknowledge that that's a real need moving forward too.
Yes. And I will say that, again, as a clinician myself, it's really important for me to be able to understand the financials. And sometimes that's harder to do with the ways in which those things are reported. So that's a priority for me to ensure that I am understanding those things and that they are communicated in a way that I think is more clear regarding our standing on all things going forward.
Couple others. When you came on board, does Burt Nash have a 2025 adopted and board approved budget for 2025?
My understanding is no, and my understanding is that's a priority for SSC as well to help us finalize that and prioritize that very soon.
Okay. And the other question is RAP. It's another program that I think we care about a lot at the county. A lot of, some of those positions were let go. Where our funding is being proposed to stay the same. What's going on with RAP?
Great question. RAP, again, is a really valuable resource that's been around for over 25 years of providing critical therapy services in our 4 Douglas County school districts. There were very minimal changes to staffing regarding to our workforce reduction for RAP. We actually transitioned a manager position into another therapist position, moved some of our case management positions to our case management team to support those needs. And we've been slowly over the last 2 years looking to expand the availability of those staff to be more calendar year rather than school year. So we're looking to ensure that there is more access for those kids in those school districts throughout the year. And again, the staffing changes were minimal related to workforce reduction for that particular team.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any more questions for Burt Nash? Okay, I'm going to move the focus to headquarters at this point. And I think the transition is appropriate because we have 2 requests in here that are for past expenses. And that's essentially what headquarters is asking for as well. We couldn't come to the county staff could not create an agreement with headquarters. Headquarters continued to provide the service and now is asking us to pay for the service that they provided. I'd love to hear, Dan, your perspective on what precedent it would set for an organization to be funded for something that the service was provided even when there wasn't an agreement in place. We just talked about Burt Nash increasing staffing and then coming back later and say, well, we increased staffing. Can you guys pay for the staffing that we increased? It seems like a similar situation with headquarters. What precedent would that set if organizations went ahead with things and then we funded them on the back end?
It does, I suppose, set a precedent, but the county and Burt Nash both advertise the local crisis line on their websites. They expect that crisis line to be answered 24/7, 365. The fact that an agreement couldn't be reached after the county decided that they would fund it to the tune of about $350,000 is understandable. Okay, the organization was going through a lot of turmoil. But the calls continue to be answered. We've not asked for the $350,000 for 24. We discounted it 50%. 25, we're still providing the service. The 24 the budget cycle for 25, the organization was in extreme crisis. The county, understandably, again, did not want to enter a contract. They continued to want the calls answered, but not necessarily to pay for it. It's I've referred to it as quantum merit. That's a legal term for payment in a quasi-contractual relationship where a service is provided and earned and money should be paid for it. So as I said in my memo to the county, I don't see this as a bailout or I see it as payment for services that were provided as part of the overall crisis continuum. I think since mid 24, things have improved. I mean, I can't say that there aren't serious issues there and that the county didn't have good grounds for what they didn't do. But I don't think it sets a bad priority to pay for services that you expected that were provided.
So if I follow that same logic, we have strategic plans for affordable housing, right? We have strategic plans for supportive housing. That logic is what I think I understood you say, like if I build housing, it's something that the county wanted, then I come back to them later and say, can you pay for what I've already built? You listed it on your website as a goal to actually provide that service, but we didn't have any agreement to provide it. It was just done. You all continued, as you said, to answer the phones, and now we're asking for payment on the back end. So maybe I'm tipping my hand a little bit here as I'm struggling with the request.
You know, I guess the county could have taken down their advertisement to everybody in the county to call 841-2345, and Bert Nash could have done the same thing and said, we're not going to pay for this service because we understand you got organizational problems and we're not going to do it. You didn't do that. People continue to call it and the service continues to be provided. I'm not sure, Patrick, where I understand we're talking about a precedent. We're also talking about unusual circumstances.
Okay, thanks. Other questions for headquarters?
Who else in the county provides this service?
Of a crisis line?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we get rollover calls from Bert Nash when on different buttons that people push. I don't know of anybody else that provides a crisis line. DECA may have their own internal for their clients, and others may have lines that people can call.
If the service were to go away, what would happen?
Well, there'd be a link that's not available. We take about 30,000 calls last year. 10,000 of them were on the local line. 80% or more of those calls get handled in a way that don't call on other services. So it's fairly cost effective in that regard. Others that need more attention get referrals, you know, warm and hot handoffs and follow-up. You know, it's a service that's been provided here for a long time. I think, like I say, it's a cost-effective service. It's a part of the continuum of a crisis team. And we've been working hard to rebuild those relationships with ECC, with Bert Nash, with others, with working closely with Bob and the overall team on this. You know, it'd be a big gap. You know, I don't know what happens if it doesn't get funded.
But we would have a gap, and I would assume individuals would fall through the system.
Well, one of the things probably that would happen would be that everyone would rely on 988 instead of or in addition to a local line that was 841-2345. So it would be part of that. I also want to just point out previously when and as the county funded headquarters, one of the reasons for that was the idea that headquarters was going to be the hub that deployed mobile response. Last year, ECC became the hub that deployed mobile response. So there were a couple of pieces to partnering with headquarters as we brought the crisis system components online. One was we wanted to ensure that 988 and crisis line calls would get answered in conjunction with MRT coming online. The second piece was prioritizing local people answering the local line so you can connect with local resources. The third piece was professionalization of a workforce that was basically entirely almost volunteer to a fully fledged organization with professional staffing. So those were the pieces that happened, that came online before we went through the last year and a half, 2 years. And in response to that, there have been some adjustments and changes and growth and learning about the overall 988 network and service and how it is supported.
In that regard, as Bob said, the transition from a volunteer organization to a staffed organization is well underway. So we now have 31 full-time employees, 32 part-time employees. Part-time employees are 20 hours a week, full-time 40. And a very small component of volunteerism. It's hard to staff 24/7, 21 shifts a week with volunteers whose times have to be fitted in. It's a challenge with full-time and part-time employees, but when you add in the mixture of volunteers, it gets very difficult.
And where do we stand with the current contract? Because I hear there is no contract. So where do we stand with moving towards a contract?
They're not a community partner unless the commissioners fund them. So you would need to add funds to the budget to fund them. There's no reason to have a contract if there's no funding.
Okay.
Because it's 988 is paid for by the state through federal resources. So that resource is provided to everyone. Some communities, some counties in Kansas have a local crisis line in addition to that they find a way to support financially.
Sarah, since you jumped in there, is there anything that would hold the county back from what they know currently about headquarters that would prevent you from entering into a service agreement, or you don't know enough at this point?
I'm a little nervous without a board in place, and the completion of the audits. I'm a little nervous about, the accountability in that situation at this time. And that was reflected in our rating.
So can I ask about the timing of some of those things, the audits and the board coming on? And I would also say that many of the things that made us stop honoring or not want to be in contract with headquarters are being actively addressed. So can you talk to me about timeline?
So as of July of last year when I came on, the 22 and 23 year audits had not been started. So we got that process under. We had to get SSC back in to do that. I've likened that process to being on an archaeological dig because the financial records were not in good shape. The systems were not in good shape. The 21 audit said there were material weaknesses and a lot of deficiencies. That audit wasn't completed until August of 23. So those deficiencies and weaknesses continued in 23 and started to get addressed in mid 24. Okay. I've been reluctant to seek board members when you don't have an audit to show them. And the audits are going to, both 22 and 23 are going to show those problems. We've not been able to produce a timely audit. We will be able to produce a timely audit this year on 24 financials. And I believe it will say that those weaknesses and deficiencies have been addressed. But I share county administrator and Bob's concerns about all those things, because once the audits come in, we'll have to talk with the commission, we'll have to talk with KDADS about what happens. I think my memo covers some of that in that there were estimates made and payments made that didn't square. okay, with actual expenditures. So those questions are going to have to be addressed, and what comes out of that will have to be addressed.
I think your memo thought that 22 and 23 audits might be finished up this summer, so we haven't
So
seen
we're
them
in the
quite yet.
last days of the 22 audit, okay? You know, when you bring an independent auditor in there and you can't answer some questions, they start questioning what they say in the report. So I've been having daily conversations with SSC about the completion of 22, 23, and I expect that this month. I don't think 23 will be as difficult now that we've been through the process with them. I'd say they're probably 90% complete with that already. So I would say July for 22, August for 23, and then they would start on 24, which I would hope to have by the end of October, which could then, you know, provide a basis to recruit board members. And as we work through this with KDADS and with the county, I expect ongoing conversations about that.
So building a board would come after that 2024 audit, which would show like what deficiencies are being addressed and any work plan for the future. So
Right.
maybe by the end of the year, end of 2025, to
Yes.
start recruiting a board.
But I mean, if you look at this, by the end of 25, we're going to be $336,000 in the hole. Okay. So that's why we're asking for some supplementals that pay for 24. Half of 24, the county had said they wanted and were willing to invest until the organization had problems. And then half of a 25 budget that would be similar. So that's 350,000.
Okay. Any other questions for headquarters? Thanks, Dan.
More than you wanted to hear.
All right, we also have Heartland Radak, Heartland Community Health, Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, Mir and DECA here. There's questions there.
A couple questions for Heartland Radak. Hey, how are you? Good morning. I am curious. I think I got the answer from your request, but I just want to be sure about how many people are served by a single peer recovery coach, a one full-time in a year. And also how many do you currently have in that position type? Like what's the current capacity of peer recovery coaches?
So it's a good question. And based on what we're asking for, I don't know that we have the best answer for what we're asking for. We put in our proposal that we're anticipating that this additional peer, in working primarily on a peer first, peer only, would serve or be able to talk to around 200 people a year, which seems like a lot, but there are a lot of one-off conversations, which we already know have been happening for the last 7 or 8 years, but we really haven't been gathering data on that because, you know, you go and talk to a client at the library and 3 other people stand up and come talk to you. And so that's what we want to start capturing with those kinds of things. We currently, let me make sure I get this right. We currently have 4 recovery coaches in the community.
Okay.
We're supplementing.
And just Douglas, I mean, is that for your whole organization that's serving the whole region or
Just Douglas.
4 that are working in Douglas County? Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Okay. And my other question, the peer supervisor request, are you asking to just fund a quarter of the current FTE that you have or to add a quarter-time position to the full-time supervisor that
We
you
want to
have
supplement
currently?
what we currently have.
Okay.
And part of that is so that we can get her some assistance in some other areas of the state. She currently supervises peers across 76 counties in Kansas. And a lot of her work and leadership is coming here, rightfully so. This is quite frankly the only county we work in that's got a system built like it does, and it requires a lot of her time to come over here. So we'd like to get her some assistance outside of Douglas County too.
So I just want to make sure I'm
Yeah, no,
tracking that correctly. So would it equal 1.25 a full-time equivalent and you're like, would it add a 0.25 position to support her already full-time position? Is that, or you're asking to supplement 25% of
We're asking to
her
supplement
salary?
25% of
Okay,
her salary.
thank you. I just want to make sure I'm
Thanks.
tracking correct.
Make me accountable to get you the right answer.
Okay, those are the only two questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Commissioner, just wanted to point out of the 4 recovery coaches, one of those is funded by the city at this point. So in terms of the county's commitment and request for peer support, it's three recovery coaches, and Heartland Radac funds one of the 3 with other dollars.
Can I ask, there were some changes in contracts with the sheriff's office for care coordination. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think really what ended up happening, and this may sound like a little bit of a pat answer, they are just looking to go in a little bit different direction with that care coordination position. And so we came to an agreement this spring that we would go ahead and part ways.
Jason, thank you for being, this is a really technical question. So I'm trying.
In trouble.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been talking for years and the commission is talking for years about how we're going to address the operational.
My team up here to
address the operational costs. And I don't know that we've really come up with a good solution for it. I appreciate your argument every year and I'm just trying to figure out how to address it. And one of the things I'm looking at here is when I see that, so like I'm in one of your handouts, it's got intensive care coordination on 194 individuals served. 183 are funded by Douglas County and 11 are funded through other sources. When you put your budget request together, are you looking at it by the people that are funded by Douglas County, or is it by all people served? It almost feels like I'm trying to figure out if there's a way of like, this is the cost per person served versus this is the total cost. Am I making some sense there? And I'll follow it up, and you may want to answer the first question first. Like, is there another way to put money there and say, hey, maybe it's fewer people served? You sort of mentioned that in your comments.
Could be that, that may be what ends up happening, which we really don't want to do. I mean, obviously, we're serving a lot of folks here in Douglas County. We want to continue to do that. We do utilize our other state contracts through KDHE and KDADS and DC.
You're close to that, Mike.
To help us leverage serving more people. We're just kind of at a tipping point with it, to be quite honest. And so we're trying to figure out a way that we can continue to serve at the same capacity. Asking, for its cost of doing business increase really is what it ends up being. Everybody sitting at this table, including you all, suffer through that every year. We're in a position where health insurance is becoming more and more ridiculously expensive. We've had, last year was a 30% increase that we couldn't offset anywhere. Prior to that, it's been 20% pretty much every year for the last 2 or 3 years. So, hiring and maintaining employment of good folks is just becoming harder and harder. And as evidenced by, our ongoing cost from our asks of you, hiring somebody in 2018 was much cheaper than hiring somebody in 2025. And we haven't been able to come to any kind of agreement in increasing what that front end was. But we still have those people employed and they're just costing us more money.
Still no easy solution to
No,
that. Thank
there's
you.
not.
Appreciate you going down that annual walk with me. Yeah.
Wanted to follow up on the page that had the 183 funded by Douglas County, 11 funded other sources like for intensive care coordination, and it's a similar way of laying it out for peer mentor services. It doesn't necessarily say that those are that many Douglas County connected folks versus other county connected folks. It just says who's funded by Douglas County.
Right.
So would those statements be equal? Like there's 183 people connected with Douglas County that were served by Douglas County dollars?
They're connected to Douglas County in some way, shape, or form. So you can safely say that. And what I mean by that is sometimes we see people that are from Jeff County that come down to the hospital and they're in a behavioral health crisis, and this is where they are. So we're helping them return back home. Or Johnson County is the same way.
So would that be the total number, that 194 individuals served, like those are all connected to Douglas County?
Yes.
And a portion of them are paid for with Douglas County funds? Okay, that helps me. But also brings in the next question. You do serve Shawnee County and Johnson County, and they pay a portion of your overall budget also. Is that proportional to the work that you do for the folks of each of these counties? And are you approaching those other counties for cost of living increases also?
Yes, we are. And that's a very good question. Our Shawnee County contract is strictly for community corrections clients. So it's a very strict population that we're working with there. They, how many years ago increased? 2 years ago increased our funding a little bit from a cost of living, but also to increase our presence in their office. So they added a care coordinator over there along that way. Johnson County, which are liquor tax dollars that we receive, are there to fund the precariously housed, folks that are struggling with substance use. And so, yeah, what we see over there is reflective of that. We also leverage dollars in Johnson County through our state contracts to provide the same type of service, just not at this scope that you all have been able to provide an opportunity for us to do. Just the way it has been, because those funds in Johnson County don't come from the county directly. They come through liquor tax dollars that come through United Community Services.
Thank you. I have one other line item, and I don't know that I would have flagged this, but it was in your narrative also about a large increase in travel and training budget, which when I went to your travel and training budget, it's quite large. So maybe you'd talk to me about what falls under that and why that's significant.
It's significant because anytime we have, whenever we have a new peer come on board, they're required to go through some very specific on-site training they have to travel to. Oftentimes it's an overnight. Same for our care coordinators. They go through very specific state-sponsored case management training, person-centered case management training. They often have to travel to go overnight. So hotel rooms and those kinds of things they've just gone up. And our folks are mobile. Say that again. And our clients are mobile. I mean, to put it lightly. They show up in strange and exotic places sometimes, and we go see them. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Heartland RADAC commissioners? Okay. Other questions from our partners that are here? Not from them, of them. That's a different thing. They might have lots of questions of us.
I have a question for Lori or Decca. You have a request for solar panels. Can you kind of just talk to me a little bit about what are your thoughts around the solar panels and what kind of outcomes do you think we might receive for solar panels?
So thank you. You are probably aware that we are building transitional housing at First Step at Lakeview. Because we're getting into the housing business, we're trying to figure out how to have long-term sustainability. As part of our capital improvement, our capital campaign has some long-term improvement kind of money built into it so that we can keep them for a long period of time. The other thing that we're thinking about are the expenses. And as we started thinking about expenses, electricity will be our largest expense. And as we began to talk about what we could do to curb expenses, solar panels became part of that conversation. So if we are able to put solar panels on these units, they will be 100% paid for, so electricity will not be an expense. So we were thinking about long-term sustainability. 25 years at least is the long-term sustainability for the investment made. And we don't know exactly how much electricity costs will be because we're building, but we anticipate for 10 units, a couple of thousand a month likely for those units across the board. So looking at investment now for long-term 25-year sustainability and cost effectiveness.
Thank you. Do any of the units currently have solar panels?
We're building them. So none of them do right now.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
Do you have any energy partners?
As far as for building to do the solar panels, is that what you're talking about? Cromwell and Environmental is who we're working with. And then we obviously the electricity companies and all of that. We've done a lot of research around the area. So, but Cromwell is our partner right now.
Okay, so then as we think about energy partners, what is your definition of a partner?
In this situation, my definition of a partner is talking to them about our project, talking to them about how can we get maximum value out of the investment, and their conversation with us about what would work best for meeting the needs and trying to work on long-term sustainability. We've had multiple meetings with them to talk about what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do in sustainability to keep costs down. And you've heard a couple of partners talking about costs. I don't expect electricity to cost less 25 years from now than it does now. I expect it to cost more. So that was our conversation, is how can we generate enough energy to take care of these units long-term.
Have you had conversations with energy partners about them coming on as a funding partner versus the county coming on and funding the solar panels?
We have talked to them, and the cost that we're talking about includes some in-kind kinds of costs.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll ask another one. So Douglas County helped with the initial startup costs for the units that you're building. And you had other partners that also are helping to fund for that. Are there any other partners that you're planning to approach for this particular funding piece?
We applied for a couple of grants and were told that our project was not one that they were interested in funding. So we have actually submitted a couple of proposals. Our competition is large businesses, manufacturing plants, those kinds of things in those funding request areas.
So if Douglas County were to make this investment and help with the solar panels, which would then offset your long-term utility costs, that savings, what would that go towards that kind of, I mean, much of your work helps with Douglas County priorities, but how do we make sure that it's strictly Douglas County?
Oh, any savings that we get will go right into services in Douglas County. I think you see from our budget, about every dollar that we get from Douglas County, we leverage $2 to $3 from other funding sources. So that would be exactly what we would do with savings, is continue to leverage resources and serve more people.
Thanks.
Lori, there's a supplemental request for housing assistance and rental assistance. We have rental assistance funds through Douglas County. Why would you want it just for DECA versus maybe we put $100,000 in the rental assistance fund for Douglas County? Jill's over there.
Yeah, I think this would be consistent with the ways in which we're supporting other projects, such as Artists Helping the Homeless, or the Justice Involved Transitional Housing. So if there's a client at First Step and they want to move them directly into the housing at First Step, and they don't have an ability to pay for rent, it provides DECA with bridge funding to allow that client to move directly into that unit.
Yes, Commissioner, I guess I'd say that our housing stabilization fund has been substantially limited. So it's it's tapped out. Yeah, and this would help provide supportive services for DECA, similar to how we just talked about with tenants to homeowners and Artists Helping the Homeless.
Never enough. Okay.
But I hear what your concern is, that could these dollars be combined with other dollars? But other than Housing Stabilization Collaborative, these dollars tend to be owned by particular partners.
Can I ask a clarifying question, just to put a point on it? One distinction is that the request you're asking for these direct rental assistance dollars would be for the clients that would be housed in the project that you're currently building, correct?
That is correct.
And not necessarily community-based clients that are living elsewhere that might be receiving outpatient services.
The money that we are requesting in this cycle is for women and children who would be living in our units, moving mostly from, right, First Step to Lakeview.
Yeah, that's why I just wanted to make the distinction versus them being on leases with private landlords out in the community, which would, then they might seek HSC assistance once a year related to that. So it's a little bit of a distinction.
That's correct.
And I would anticipate in the contract that this would be a not to exceed amount for reimbursement based on its use. There was one other thing I was going to say, but I forget what it was. I apologize.
I think the analogy was that this is probably more analogous to transitions and our funding for transitions. So we would be paying for the operating costs for some of these folks that are unable to pay. Is that?
Yeah, and I also think staff are trying to more consistently align what a tenant-based rental assistance subsidy looks like within the realm of the supportive housing projects that are funded by the county. That's work in progress. If you look at how that is interpreted in the transitions budget, it's considerably larger than anybody else. And that's one of the things we're trying to address through building the justice involved housing project and looking at, a 2-bedroom unit rent is $1,100 a month at this point in this community. And so when we consider multiple rental assistance requests, that we look at it through that lens. DECA significantly revised their initial request. It was a request for vouchers. It was twice as expensive. Through conversations with staff, we calibrated this down to where we are with this request at this point.
Because we're learning. We are just learning this work.
We all are. I mean, we're building new things all the time in this community, so it is part of the process. My last question for you, Lori, and then to piggyback, it's also kind of a question for staff that maybe we just need to put a pin in, but your request related to the special alcohol tax for the past 5 years. I know staff mentioned earlier that we haven't done distributions of those in recent years. We have a larger conversation to have about how we have utilized that in the past. Now this new municipalities fighting addiction money, and think about how we calibrate that in the future. Beyond the last 5 years, which you're requesting some retroactive funding for, what did your amounts look like before that you would request and receive a ballpark? I mean, was it akin to 25,000? Was it
It
significantly
was
less?
roughly in that
It
area,
was consistently $25,000 a year.
Okay.
between 20 and 25 for the last 5 to 6 years,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
And I think what staff would like to do is to have it more targeted to what specifically is that $25,000 getting? And as opposed to just $25,000 to help DECA.
Historically, we've used that to provide services to the uninsured. It leverages our block grant, allows us to serve more Douglas County residents than we normally would on the state block grant money.
And
That's historically how we used it and how we would intend to use it in the future.
we built addressing those dollars, the use of those dollars into the process. I think staff were surprised that the number of one-time requests and the amount for the one-time requests were a lot lower than we were anticipating. DECA's request was much higher than anybody else's request for one-time dollars, but they were making the case that over the last there was a precedent of they were receiving $25,000 a year. They had not received those dollars. So we are trying to calibrate how all of these partners could make requests annually of a fund that will gradually shrink and really only wisely use probably one-time requests. Things change. There's a need for, the need for naloxone and what that looks like changes.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any more questions for DECA? Okay. We don't, we have, I don't want to leave Jonathan out. I have a question for Jonathan. And before I do your question, Jonathan, I just want to publicly say, I appreciate your background material. It's like an exemplar for other partners. If you're looking for it, it really did a nice job because quite honestly, there's some things in there that costs were not what you had anticipated and they were lower. We almost never see that in our background information, that costs are actually lower. But the key thing that I want to check in on is, your work in Zero Suicide. And then I also read in Headquarters thing that they are doing something very similar. What's been your relationship with Headquarters? And Dan, if you want to jump in there, for doing, sort of the suicide prevention work. That currently is with public health, is my understanding. And then I think Headquarters thinks it may be in that space as well. Start with Jonathan and then Dan.
Sure. Well, first thing I'll say is I can't take all the credit for our exemplar budget requests. I got a really good team. I think Charlie's in here somewhere. He helped out with that, but I appreciate that. Thanks for the question. So with Zero Suicide, our Zero Suicide coordinator collaborates with not just Headquarters Kansas, but really all of the health providing agencies in Douglas County. And while I haven't had the opportunity to meet with Dan yet, I did previously when it was transitioned over to public health. I met pretty frequently with the director who was in position there. So really what that looks like for us is we transitioned from being an agency who adopted Zero Suicide to where now we're an agency who is leading that work and training other agencies on how to adopt Zero Suicide model in that. So hopefully that answers part of your question.
So the new suicide prevention coordinator and our staff met about 2 weeks ago, had at our staff meeting and are working together and plan to work in coordination with each other. We identified a lot of mutual things that we're working on and that we will continue to work on together.
I think there's a distinction that's important here. Zero Suicide is a quality improvement process and a project to implement quality improvement specifically around suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention in healthcare providers. Suicide prevention initiatives are things that happen in schools, things that happen in the larger community. So what we're trying to do, striving to do, aiming to do in the CHIP is to implement Zero Suicide with fidelity to the model among all of our healthcare partners. And that includes LMH, it includes everybody here at the table. That is a substantial challenge for a community collaborative as opposed to how this is done in other communities and in other healthcare organizations. Typically a hospital system will say, we're going to implement Zero Suicide in our hospital system. We are trying to collectively leverage and learn from each other how to implement these practices with fidelity and to share how that's being done in different contexts. It looks different at DECA than it does at LMH. It looks different in a community health center than it does at Mirror in a residential treatment facility. It looks different at TRC. So we're trying to collectively learn how is the community and the healthcare system, right, doing a more consistent, intentional job of QI around this.
So Bob, what I hear you saying is they're doing different things. Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. Okay.
I have a question for Heartland Health. Do we have time? Okay. Hey, Julie. So the county funds about 10% of your overall budget, the look of it, and those are for very specific programs within what you do. You have a supplemental request in for $1.5 million to help offset or to lower your mortgage on the new building. And I'm just wondering if you can help make a case for the savings that would come with that. What are those dollars proposed to do that advance Douglas County funded initiatives? I know you're working more in psychiatry than you did previously. This request isn't new. We've seen it before, but can you make a case for how would we get assurances that the money saved based on our investment would advance Douglas County priorities?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question.
And we also really appreciate the commissioners taking the time to come in and talk with us individually about our supplemental request and tour the facility. We're really proud of it. This is a braided funding request. We had a unique opportunity with a federal grant during COVID to leverage some federal dollars that were specific towards building capacity and construction. And so this funding request is braided. It has federal funds, state funds, local philanthropic giving, an investment of Heartland's operating reserves, and also some foundation requests. And Heartland's organizational capacity right now is really strong. So our request of the county for the $1.5 million would reduce the principal balance of this loan, and it would free up approximately $12,000 a month in operating or in that we could reinvest back into operations. That would be approximately $140,000 per year, which could pay the salary of another psychiatric nurse practitioner or a behavioral health therapist and a care coordinator. So again, we believe that at a time when we know that we are in a mental health crisis, that this request honors the original intent of the sales tax. It's a one-time expenditure and would absolutely increase Heartland's capacity to provide additional care to our community at a time when we know it's really needed.
If the commission were to consider that request, would that be some of the things that could be worked into like a service agreement of that, that is an additional 12,000 a month capacity towards what we would write into our contract,
Sure.
even though it's a one-time gift? I'm just thinking aloud. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
and we report on outcomes related to psychiatry as part of our psychiatric infrastructure funding to help fund our child psychiatrist. And so those could be additional outcomes that we could report on a quarterly basis.
Thanks. I don't have any more questions for Heartland.
I had a question. Do you anticipate reduced Medicaid funding, and could that savings possibly have to be used to offset that?
So I think it's we're all of us at this table are probably feeling equally unsettled about potential changes to Medicaid. We have already, with the unwinding, seen a decline in the number of our patients that have Medicaid as their coverage. And similarly to what Bert Nash has experienced, we have also seen an increase in the number of commercially insured patients in our practice with policies that don't cover the services that we're providing. And so, or they just don't have, they're underinsured, they don't have good coverage. So we are continually looking for strategies to look at our payer sources and increase the number of Medicare and Medicaid patients that we're serving in the health center. That's always a balance. So, I feel like we are prepared for those potential changes, and we're very closely evaluating monthly our revenues related to program income.
Okay, commissioners, any other questions?
Actually, just remembered I have one more questions for Dr. Watkins, for Bert Nash, that I skipped over before. You talk about a decrease expected from KDADs over time, correct?
The CIC funding?
Yeah,
is that
sorry,
what
the
you-
CIC
yes.
funding specifically. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm tracking the information correct. Is that both a result of there will be more CICs and it's a limited pool of funding, which you mentioned? And is it also that the CCBHC rate is just lower than we initially projected for at Bert Nash for our community? And is that what's contributing to the adjustment?
I don't know about the second one, but the
Okay.
first one you mentioned about more sites being eligible for that CIC funding is absolutely a contributor to our expectation of reduced availability of those funds. Ryan is here. He's our
And Ryan, if you're going to say anything, just make sure you use a mic if you have anything to add to it. So it sounds like it's that now there will be more CICs, but not necessarily a growth in that pool of funding from the state. Do you have an idea of the anticipated decrease amount yet?
Good morning. I would add, we saw this with the mobile response team in the past few years. The state's KDADS has been transparent that they're prioritizing teams that are starting up and that are building. And then if we follow the course and the trajectory that we saw with the mobile team, that number's gotten less as the competition throughout the state has increased. I think this year, as an example, the mobile team was competing with 20 mobile teams across Kansas. So there's a little bit less for all.
Thank you.
Well, Jason from Mirror has kindly sat through all of these other questions, so I'm going to ask one for you, and I think it's my last. So in your budget request, you're fairly new in Douglas County, and so your organization, your full organizational picture isn't given here. This is just your Douglas County interaction. So it shows a negative fund balance. Would that just be a portion of what's being served in Douglas County that's being covered by the organization at large? Am I understanding that correctly?
No, I believe that is just the carryover that was unutilized from the Cardinal House delays in opening. So we had to.
They were not able to spend all of their one-time dollars. So that negative just reflects that it's that one-time request that we built in.
I understand. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Any other questions, commissioners? Well, it's been a full day. Thank you, partners, for being here. We appreciate it. We will adjourn until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you're back for more, we're going to talk to the sheriff's office at that time. Thanks, everybody.